I suspect we're going to be hard pressed for time. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Laura, are you about ready? Or Tia? Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who I don't know, my name's Chris Barrett. I'm a faculty member at Cornell, and I'm the moderator organizer of this organized symposium. So profuse thanks to AAEA for setting this up and letting us set up a somewhat non-traditional format for an organized symposium, something that doesn't fit neatly in the regular AAEA schedule for the upcoming annual meetings that begin this coming weekend. So we really appreciate the business office setting this up for all of us and making this available free of charge to the community. It is being recorded, so please keep that in mind. The recording will be available later so that those who wish to view it asynchronously can do so. If you have friends or colleagues who you think would be interested in some of the topic matter, besides getting in touch directly with any of the speakers, please direct them to the archived recording of this, which AAEA will make available through its newsletter. We'll publicize it once it's ready. We have a very packed schedule. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker. I will give each of you a 5-minute warning and then a 1-minute warning just in chat. I'll open my screen up when time is up. So you won't see, if you suddenly see me appear, that means you probably haven't checked your chat. All right. So we're very fortunate. Laura is going to kick us off with an overview. Everybody hopefully is aware this is a Farm Bill year. Laura's going to kick us off with an overview of what's in store, what are the current pressing policy questions that applied researchers might contribute to within the context of the current deliberations on especially nutrition assistance within the Farm Bill. Over to you, Laura. Thank you for taking time to join us.
Sure, yeah, and really thrilled to be here. And thank you so much, Chris, for putting together this just fantastic symposium. Share screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that in presentation mode. And thank you to the two of you that are kept your cameras on. It's so nice to have like a couple faces to see while you're presenting. So that's great. Not to put you on the spot. Feel free to turn your camera off if you want. But so thrilled to be here. I think this is such a fantastic symposium. Really shows the intersection of these major sectors that influence the how low-income households are able to acquire food. And I want to, as Chris said, I'm going to primarily focus on how the Farm Bill affects the food resources of low-income households. So I'll talk about the programs that are in the bill, some of the other provisions over the years that have influenced the food environment the low-income households face. But I do want to start just by taking a little step back and thinking about how food assistance fits into the overall safety net. So I'm sure we all realize food is not the only kind of basic need that low-income households have. So the U.S. has a variety of safety net programs that help low-income households meet their basic needs. So I want to just start with an overview of that. So this is an overview of spending on major social assistance programs. This, I will say, is fiscal 2019. So this is pre-pandemic. And there are just a few takeaways from this slide. One, that we have a real patchwork of programs in the US, so that address healthcare, food, housing, other needs. And SNAP is an important part of that. Obviously, Medicaid is in terms of spending, kind of dwarfs everything else, but SNAP and the National School Lunch Program, the WIC program, are important parts of that safety net. Panel A shows our in-kind assistance programs, and then Panel B shows our cash and tax credits. So I think another takeaway of this, at least historically, many of our programs are really focused on in-kind, providing in-kind benefits. Cash assistance historically has been very focused on specific demographic groups. So we have the earned income tax credit that goes to low-income earners who file a tax return. And then we also have the supplemental security income that's very tightly targeted to the disabled. So I've often in the past presented this slide and said, kind of ended with that my impression is that the US really is more comfortable providing generally in-kind programs, more so than cash assistance. So you'll see the TANF cash that used to be the AFDC program in 1996. It was converted to TANF. That was a program that supported low-income single parents and their children. The cash portion of that has really declined to be, much less significant, quite insignificant, I would say at this point. And so my takeaway often from this was just the US preference for in-kind programs. I think the pandemic really changed that. It remains to be seen whether that was just a temporary change, but we had 3 rounds of stimulus checks. We had an expanded child tax credit that was introduced through pandemic era legislation. The expansion of that was an expansion to low-income households, and that benefit was provided monthly. That has now expired. But I think there's a pretty convincing body of evidence to show that actually influenced or reduced food-related hardship. And so I just want to kind of highlight that because as you're thinking about food assistance, to kind of, continue to think about it in this broader framework and to kind of keep an eye on these programs. I think there'll be continuing debate about the things like the expanded child tax credit. So those are worthwhile things to kind of keep an eye on and try to contribute to debates on, even though those are outside the Farm Bill. But getting back to the Farm Bill, I will outline the primary food assistance programs that are authorized by the Farm Bill. And as Chris said, this is a Farm Bill year, or as we say, at least it's a Farm Bill year until December 31st. And if a Farm Bill isn't passed, then next year will be a Farm Bill. So we'll see what happens with that. There's a lot going on now. There's Congress is really deep into kind of the appropriations bills right now, the bills that kind of fund the overall federal government. And so, it's honestly, it's anybody's guess when the Farm Bill will be reauthorized. It's authorized through August, September 2023. Often what's happened in the past few cycles is the programs will be extended up until the point when Congress is able to actually pass the official kind of reauthorizing legislation. So primary food assistance program, SNAP, I think we probably all know that one. That's kind of our cornerstone of the food assistance system in the US. There are also 3 food distribution programs reauthorized by the Farm Bill. And I think those are ones that there are challenges to trying to, get the data that you need to research these, but I think these are relatively understudied programs too. So I did just want to highlight them. So SNAP accounts for 2/3 of federal food assistance spending. It's a lot of almost all of the food assistance spending in the Farm Bill itself. The food distribution programs that I talked about are all combined into this all other program slice here. That's a tiny slice of the whole all federal food assistance spending. And I will just mention there are food assistance programs that are reauthorized outside of the Farm Bill. So the child nutrition programs, the school lunch, school breakfast, and WIC are kind of major ones that are authorized by something we call the Child Nutrition Reauthorization. So if you kind of care about this broader food assistance network, those are, there's other legislation you want to keep track of as well. And really, I mean, any legislation can make changes to these programs. I mean, the Farm Bill and the Child Nutrition Reauthorization are the primary vehicles, but people who are following things that are happening in Congress will know that. So the recent debt relief bill made some changes to SNAP, made some changes to who's considered subject to work requirements in SNAP under the able-bodied adults without dependents stipulations. But these Farm Bill and Child Nutrition authorizations are the big ones. So the FDPIR, the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, that provides monthly food packages to low-income households and tribal communities. This is really an alternative to SNAP. So a household can either choose SNAP or choose FDPIR. That program is administered usually by an ITO, called an Indian Tribal Organization. It's a small program relative to SNAP for sure, but it's a really vital alternative. It was really developed in recognition of kind of the remote areas in which many of the Native American reservations lie, and potential low access to SNAP offices, to food retailers. And so it does really provide a vital alternative to households that may have less access, for whom SNAP is less of a viable option. And then these next two programs, TFAP and the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, these really lie at the heart of this intersection, I think, between federal food assistance and charitable food assistance. They are the Congressional Research Service did a really nice graphic that I stole for this to show kind of how the food flows from USDA, who will purchase commodities, down to kind of the local level to agencies like food pantries, soup kitchens, congregate meal settings, who actually distribute the food to low-income households. So those local organizations are often pantries, emergency or soup kitchens, or shelters. They really kind of administer the program at the local level. And this TFAP and CSFP are really considered supplements for households. They can receive SNAP or other benefits and still receive still receive a TFAP or CSFP. And oftentimes, participation in those programs can allow you to kind of qualify for receipt of these programs. So TFAP, I think, has been an interesting case during the pandemic because as you can see, in fiscal 2022, they had annual spending of about $1 billion. So that's probably 2 or 3 times what I think had been in the few years before the pandemic. And so that really got a big boost from pandemic era legislation, which provided more money for USDA to procure foods. And there was actually also a big variation. TFAP really grew out of an effort to support farm prices. So it was initially kind of an effort to use up foods that the federal government had procured in order to support farm prices. It then became a permanent program and now has funds both to buy foods, but also still uses what they call the bonus commodities. Those are foods that USDA buys and can distribute through TFAP. And then CSFP is very targeted to low-income households. Again, there's this distribution chain down to local pantries. It's also administered at the local level by food pantries, and it also serves, like TFAP, it can serve as a supplement to other federal food assistance. So it served about 658,000 participants in an average month in 2022, with the annual spending of about $350 million. So programs that are small but vital the households that rely on them. So there are other provisions. I just kind of gave a sample of other provisions that have been in the Farm Bill that have affected low-income households. We're actually going to hear more about stocking requirements, so I'm excited to hear about that presentation today. There's also grants for what's now called the GusNIP grant program that funds some of the kind of pricing incentives to try to increase purchases of healthy vegetables. There's fruits and vegetables. There's also grants and technical assistance that are intended to kind of address to increase the supply of healthy food in areas where there's low income, low access. And there's also been pilot projects, even though school lunch program is typically authorized by other legislation. The Farm Bill in the past has funded pilot projects within that program. So I think there are a few ways economic research could really help inform the Farm Bill. So one is just kind of, our dedication, I would say, to trying to estimate program outcomes within a causal framework. And so there's been a number of studies on that. I think I think to the extent to which we kind of broaden out how we think about what those program outcomes are can be really useful. I think economics, looking at the programs through an economic lens can really help with kind of trying to measure targeting effectiveness and benefit adequacy. And also kind of, as I was alluding to before, kind of examining programs within their broader context. And I think this symposium is a great example of that. So, and I think economics allows us to, or provides kind of a framework for kind of a very systematic analysis of kind of the policy trade-offs that occur within programs. So realizing that increasing program access can potentially increase the benefit leakage. And so trying to understand how putting proposed policies in that kind of framework of trade-offs, I think is really useful. Another policy trade-off is kind of this in-kind versus cash assistance. That was one that I think, am I up?
You got about 15 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay. So I think, and I can share these slides out later. I think the overall takeaway is kind of thinking about the policy debate and how that fits into an economic framework. I think that's the biggest advantage that we have as economists coming into this. There are some opportunities and challenges, which I'm happy to talk about further if we have time later. And also, I was kind of curious if Chris will give me 10 more seconds. So I wanted to have a little interactive portion, and I just put up a few resources that I use to follow the debates, and would be curious to hear, what other resources other people are using to kind of just sort of figure out what's happening at the policy level. Okay, and I will end there.
Thank you so much, Laura. Sure. That was terrific. Let me suggest that people respond to Laura's plea for links to other good resources. Just pop those into the chat so that any of us can see those, please. I see Andy's already done that by putting Parks blog on there. Yes,
that's great. Thank you. Yeah, and I'll compile those and I'll update this slide. So if we're sharing out the slides later, everybody can kind of have a full list.
That'd be great. Thank you so much, Laura. You did a great job getting us kicked off and putting this in context of the Farm Bill. I would just echo that as co-editor in chief of food policy, the things we're looking for in that journal are very much what you're looking for to help inform those of you who are in the executive branch trying to inform policymakers in DC. So I think we all are kind of on the same page. With that, let me invite Lauren Miller to take over. So we are going to have now a sequence of of several very short 10-minute presentations, and then we will do questions and answer and discussion after the last of this first sequence. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Can you all see that?
We do.
Okay, perfect. All right.
There you go.
Do you see the normal view? Okay. So I'm Lauren Miller. I'm an egg economist at the Economic Research Service. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the relationship between public and private food assistance, in particular evidence from the National Household Food Acquisition and Purchase Survey. Disclaimer that the findings are my own and should not be construed to represent official policy. So jumping right in, why do we need data in the public and the private food assistance area? Now, this is not obviously the crowd that I need to justify this to, but so, we want data on economics, food expenditure, economic impact of food assistance. It's very important for equity issues, racial disparities in food access, food security, obviously health status, health impacts of food assistance in the public health, diet quality, a lot of different nutrition aspects of nutrition. And there's also a lot of niche topics like farmers market, food waste, school meals, food markets. It's crazy the amount of research that has come out of food apps. I've been doing a lot of work quantifying the impact. We even have chemistry papers coming out of food apps. So I think it shows that comprehensive data allows for comprehensive research, which can ultimately inform public policy. So what is the gap in the data that we have now? So to have comprehensive data, ideally we'd have expenditures, food at home and away from home, foods received for free, benefit timing and receipt of SNAP and WIC, socioeconomic data, and health and behavior data. So what do we have that's missing? So a lot of surveys include expenditures or free foods, but don't necessarily include both. A lot of surveys are missing health, behavior, or benefit information. And I know, if this data is so great, why aren't we, swimming in this data? Why aren't we collecting this data? It's very hard data to collect. It's super high burden. And also it's very expensive data to collect. Diary surveys are. So food apps is still one of the only data sources that has collected comprehensive data of this level. Food apps was fielded in 2012 to 2013, so it's a bit older now. But so it did have food event information, food item information, including prices, quantity, and size, nutrition of those food items, personal information of respondents, income and program participation, SNAP and WIC participation, as well as some habits and behavior. And so, like I said, it was fielded in 2012 and 2013. It included food at home and away from home, establishments, and food obtained for free over a 7-day diary period. It was a nationally representative sample of 4,826 households, and there were 4 target populations, SNAP households, and then non-SNAP households across 3 different income domains. So I think that this is a great figure to open up some of the research findings with. So the importance of collecting free food acquisition. So this is the percent of all food acquisition events that were free by total number of event. And we see the prevalence of family and friends. So SNAP households we do see are pretty different from non-SNAP households, both higher and lower income. But we see that across all family and friends is a big source of free food events, which is something that a lot of surveys don't capture. That's very difficult to capture. We also see that traditional private food assistance count for a very small number of total events, but to keep in mind, this isn't necessarily total calories or total money spent or total in general. This is just of the number of events. And we also know that there was some underreporting. There's likely some underreporting, in particular with people who did obtain free foods at a place of worship. We know that there were possibly some misreporting in that area. So from food apps within the food assistance research realm, so we've had a lot of research in public food assistance, SNAP and WIC spending, the benefit cycle of the National School Lunch Program. We've had private food assistance, so food banks and food pantries. And we've also had alternative acquisition, acquisitions that may not necessarily fall into those two. So home and community gardens, hunting and fishing, friends and family. So some of the key findings that we've had in public food assistance, I will say there's about to be a bunch of citations. I do have all of the full citations at the end if you are interested. I'm more than happy to share slides with you. But so SNAP households exhibit time inconsistent preferences and do not view a SNAP dollar as fully fungible with a non-SNAP dollar. Very interesting, very important finding. SNAP participating households also had a lower diet quality as measured by the 2010 Healthy Eating Index than both lower and higher income non-participating households. Another really important finding. 90% of both SNAP and food insecure households do their usual grocery shopping at either a supermarket or a supercenter, the same as higher income consumers. This was a huge finding for us in terms of food access. This is a really important finding when we're looking at the food environment. So this is a figure actually by Laura Tian, who you just heard from. But so this shows the benefit cycle. So if you aren't familiar with the benefit cycle, at the beginning, when SNAP or WIC are received, there tends to be a spike in spending, which peters off through the end of the month, which this shows. In terms of private food assistance, so overall households who use private food charities were found to be older and poorer relative to SNAP households. Very low food security was positively associated with the use of community food sources. And I think this is a super important finding. So among SNAP participants, 15.6% participated in private food charities, while among private food charity participants, 67.4% also received SNAP benefits. So if you're only looking at private food charities, you might not be capturing, obviously, a lot of SNAP folks who aren't necessarily using the food charities. So some on alternative acquisitions. This kind of follows a general logic, but I think it's important to highlight. So rural households were more likely to get garden produce from someone else's garden or have a garden in season. And they also were more likely to get food by hunting or fishing than metro households. Obviously, you know, we're not poaching deer in the middle of New York City, so this makes sense. But I think the level of difference, almost 40% versus almost 20%, is worth noting. So circling back to kind of how I started this. So there's so much research that has come out of Food Apps 1. But so this research isn't possible without this high quality comprehensive data, in particular data that comes from the one single source, so that we have information from households about their benefit information, about their socio-demographics, all of this. So having that comprehensive data is what allows for this cross-disciplinary research. I mean, we've even had research in like food waste. We've had research, like I said, we've had chemistry papers. There's been a lot of research. But in the framing of public and private food assistance, it's allowed people to really hone in on specific topics that are really important for policymaking. So that's the goal with all this data, obviously. So you may be thinking 2012 was actually quite a long time ago now. And the food landscape has changed quite a lot. So there's been impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic that we're still kind of wrapping our heads around. There's been the rapid introduction of technology for food acquisition, so mobile food ordering, meal kits, online grocery ordering, including EBT online grocery ordering, so lots of things. So these are all considerations for new data collections, but there also were other considerations. So burden, like I said, this is very high burden, and declining response rates. We're seeing declining response rates across all federal surveys, and then respondent fatigue with how much it takes to get this comprehensive data. It's difficult for respondents to not experience fatigue. And so one of the ways we're trying to combat that is by the introduction of extant data. So essentially supplementing, minimizing what we can get from respondents and then supplementing the rest with databases. And so there are currently continuing developments with Food Apps. Food Apps tested a native smartphone application in a field test in fall of 2022. And we do have continuing efforts towards a new collection. So that's all that I have. This is my email. Feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to chat.
Thank you so much, Laura. And that was really fascinating. Both your quick coverage of such a rich literature, as well as the updates on current food apps. You also did a fabulous job modeling time use. Thank you. May the other presenters follow your outstanding lead. The next presenter is Ann Byrne, also from USDA ERS. Over to you, Ann.
Can you see just my slides?
We see it.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Chris and AAEA, for organizing and hosting this event. It's really a privilege to be here among these fellow researchers and scholars to think about these important issues. And it's also a privilege to represent this team that I'm a part of. We're studying chain reaction effects of retailer participation in SNAP on beneficiary and bystander welfare. This is a collaboration with Xiao Dong, Jesse Hanbury, Eric James, and Catherine Meckel, and we're supported by wonderful research assistants at both Penn and UC San Diego. Before I begin, the same standard disclaimers that this is the findings and conclusions of the authors and should not be construed to represent any official USDA or US government determination or policy, and that the analysis, findings, and conclusions expressed in this presentation should not be attributed to Circana, formerly IRI, or Nielsen IQ TV links. So why are we studying this question? First of all, as Laura mentioned, SNAP is a huge program. It's a really big part of nutrition assistance, the largest part of federal spending on nutrition assistance, and it's larger than the Charitable Food Assistance Network as well. It's the second largest anti-poverty program in the country. So it affects a ton of different households, and it affects them in a very specific way, which is their ability to acquire food through the traditional market. So another reason that we're studying this question is the retailer involvement in SNAP. We're really interested in how retailers are involved in SNAP because they're an important part of the SNAP ecosystem. Unlike some food assistance delivery mechanisms where you have pantries or you have government distribution, our largest food assistance program in this country is delivered through the retail environment, and that's a key component of it. As you see here, the numbers of firms that are authorized to accept SNAP varies from year to year, but it's hundreds of thousands of firms, locations where people can come and spend their benefits. So retailer involvement is important. We also want to know about who those retailers are, and what we see is that there's been a shift in where people are shopping. So looking back to 1999, we see a decline in the food at home expenditures at supermarkets, and there's more and more people in the food market looking to mass merchandisers, supercenters, dollar stores, club stores, and other non-traditional retailers to acquire their food. So thinking about these non-traditional retailers and the increasingly important role that they play in the food market is another key driver for us to ask our research question. Most importantly, we think about entry of non-traditional retailers into SNAP following the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So this was the expansion, this was legislation after or in the wake of the Great Recession that expanded SNAP and other programs to help families that were in need. And what we saw during this time was a large entry of mass merchandisers, club stores, drug stores, dollar stores, and other non-traditional retailers into SNAP authorization. Grocery stores and supermarkets had already been authorized, so this is where we see this large entry of these non-traditional retailers, and we're able to really tell a story about how non-traditional retailers and their entry into SNAP affect household welfare. So those are the four key motivating factors: the size and scope of SNAP, the retail involvement in SNAP, the growth of non-traditional retailers, and the entry of non-traditional retailers into SNAP following ARRA expansion that motivate our research question. How does SNAP authorization of non-traditional retailers affect household welfare? We conduct our analysis in 3 stages. The first stage looks at household demand. We think about households demanding different characteristics at stores as reflected in their expenditure shares. Households are concerned with access, prices, variety, and the SNAP status, the changing SNAP status of local stores. In addition to thinking about household demand, we also think about changes at the store level. So stores respond to changes in consumer behavior in their competitive environment. So stores that adopt SNAP and stores that compete with stores that adopt SNAP may adjust prices, variety, and other characteristics, which is going to impact SNAP households and non-SNAP households alike. These two sort of arms of our analysis come together to help us estimate our welfare and answer that research question: how does SNAP authorization of non-traditional retailers affect household welfare? And you'll note here I said household, not just SNAP household, because those changes at the store level may affect non-SNAP households as well. So I want to give a preview of results from our first stage of analysis, in part to show you what's going on there, but also to motivate some of the analysis in stage 2. So here we're thinking about household demand. What we do is we estimate a demand model where expenditures are a function of distance to stores, and then an interaction term between SNAP store status and chain. What we have here are non-traditional retailers as compared to a traditional grocery store. We see club stores, 3 club stores, two dollar stores, 3 drugstores, and a mass merchandiser. Now you'll note that the club stores have positive demand as compared to the traditional grocery store, whereas the dollar, drug, and mass merchandiser have negative demand. But what I really want to focus on here is the difference between the red and blue bars. This is SNAP households demand for stores of the same brand or the same chain that are SNAP authorized versus not SNAP authorized. And what we see here is that there's a greater demand among SNAP households for stores that are SNAP authorized. This makes sense. A household that has SNAP benefits to spend would likely seek out stores where they can spend those benefits. But what gets really interesting is when we look at the same thing for non-SNAP households. And what we see is that comparing those red bars and those blue bars, we see that in some non-traditional retailers, there also is a difference in demand for SNAP authorized versus not SNAP authorized stores. So we see here that non-SNAP households also have an interest in SNAP authorized, or a demand for SNAP authorized chains, stores within the same chain. This leads us to believe that there must be store effects at play and something happening within the store that would affect not just SNAP households, but non-SNAP households as well. That's really what underlies the motivation for conducting stage 2 of our analysis, where stores respond to changes in consumer behavior in their competitive environment. We look at owned stores and we look at competitor stores. Now, I want to pause for a minute and take a nod to this title, this slide that I put up, chain reaction, and also address this endogeneity concern. So there's an endogeneity issue, which you may have been thinking about as I'm talking, which is that stores might accept SNAP because SNAP benefits increase. We saw this large increase in both participation in the blue line and inflation-adjusted spending on SNAP in the tanned bars between 2008 and 2012. So there was an influx of SNAP benefit dollars circulating in local economies, which may have motivated local stores to adopt SNAP if they weren't doing so before. We overcome this issue by exploiting chain-wide adoption. The idea with chain-wide adoption is you have a local environment where you have more SNAP benefits circulating in the local economy, which affects the local store. But that store is part of a chain. And if this happens in a few locations for that chain, then the chain may adopt SNAP universally across all of its stores, including those that are not affected locally by changes in participation and SNAP benefits. So this chain adoption introduces an exogenous change or semi-exogenous change in SNAP authorization at the store level. And this is what we exploit, and these are the chains that we look at to conduct our analysis. So back to the 3-stage approach. Our first stage is this demand model, where we use a discrete choice model to model where consumers select stores based on characteristics. These characteristics include SNAP authorization, distance from the residence to the store, chain, and other characteristics. We generate a weight of consumer preference for each store so that we can think about demand. The first stage estimation also generates a running variable, which provides a measure of local retail competition by weighting each store by consumer preference. This is used in our second stage when we look at indirect effects. The second stage looks at store effects, where we have direct effects of the owned store, the store that adopted SNAP, and indirect effects, the competitor store that is treated by the running variable. In the third stage, we look at welfare estimation itself from SNAP status and store effect changes. To give a preview of the results from the second stage and to discuss our next steps, we'll look at direct effects and indirect effects that we're finding right now. So in terms of direct effects, we find a sales increase at stores that adopt SNAP. And this may not seem intuitive, but maybe not obvious, because it could be that individuals would just swap out dollars that they were already spending at the store for SNAP benefits. But we do indeed see that they're spending more overall at these stores, which we're seeing especially for dollar stores and mass merchandisers. We're seeing some evidence that variety increases at newly authorized stores in particular categories. We're seeing little evidence of price movement. In terms of competitor stores, we see that grocery stores lose revenue, mass merchandisers are gaining revenue across the board, and again, we see little evidence of price movement. Our next steps are to continue analyzing store effects and to conduct welfare estimates. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for your interest in this project. I hope you'll stick with us, and thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much, Anne. And another model presenter, 7 seconds to spare. Well done. Excellent talk. I look forward to reading the full paper in the near future. Also, a great segue to our next speaker, who will be Zisha Huang. Zisha just finished his master's degree at Cornell and is a incoming first-year PhD student. Zisha, over to you, please.
Sure. Let me share my screen. Okay, everybody, and also enter the presentation over here. And hi everyone, today I'm gonna present a work about food system environments, spatial economic analysis. So, okay, here we go. So the motivation for this study, as some of the previous speakers already mentioned, that SNAP authorized retailers and food pantries, as well as other outlets, make up the local food system environments. And these environments matter for food insecurity households. First, because of the proximity between these outlets, implies about traveling costs. The literature has found that these food insecurity households have low vehicle ownership rate and they are sensitive to traveling costs. And secondly, the composition of these outlets is related to the choice set faced by household about product varieties, healthiness, and also the price that house gonna pay for them. Despite the importance of this topic, there is a lack of understanding of the full local food assistance environments. And usually private food assistance programs are not included because of the data availability problem. And here comes our study. We are trying to address 2 questions. The first is what are those differences in food assistance environments between urban and rural areas? And second, what is the association between food pantry must visit and pantry proximity to different types of SNAP retailers? To tackle these questions, we combine food pantry and SNAP retailer administrative data sets with a rich set of other data sets, including geospatial data, as well as the local socioeconomic features that we obtained from the American Commuter Survey for 6 counties in upstate New York for a 3-year period. And using that comprehensive data sets, we documented the urban concentration of pantries and SNAP retailers and described the local food assistance environments from the view of proximity and composition. So here's a map showing the spatial locations of food pantries in the 6 county regions, and also based on the municipal boundaries and areas of different types. So in the figure, we see the areas shaded in red. Those are urbanized areas defined by the census. So they are a group of census tracts or census blocks that all together with a population over 50,000. And those blue areas are defined similarly by the census with a population between 2,500 and 50,000. And those unshaded areas are generally rural areas. So from this figure, we find that pantries are concentrated in urbanized areas and urban clusters, while other pantries are spread fairly evenly across municipalities. And the next is a summary table for the census tracts. We would like to know where they are. So besides showing the statistics for all food pantries, we further differentiate them by whether the census tract has and has not, whether they has a food pantry or not. And the last column just tests their statistic differences. We find that census tracts with and without food pantries are similar. Pantries are not concentrated in poor communities. And further, we present the summary statistics for pantry cross-sectional features. So the first column is for all food pantries that we have. And the second row is for food pantries in rural areas. And the last 3 columns are shows the differences of pantries of different urban and rural types and test their statistic differences. So from the first row, that's the count of pantries within 10-mile distance. We find that pantries in urbanized areas has about 2 times more pantries near than those in urban clusters or rural areas. And for the second and third rows, we find no significant difference exists in pantry type and service duration by urban and rural locations. And to take a step further, we provide summary statistics for pantry time varying features. So similar structure as the previous tables from the first row, that's how many visits does each pantry provided. So we find that pantries in rural areas have more visits per pantry per month. And for the, you see a lot of variables over there. So the minimum distance from a pantry to different SNAP retailers, that's the proximate measurement. And the count of SNAP retailers of different types within 10 miles, that's our composition or density measurement. By comparing pantries of different urban and rural types, we had pantries in urbanized areas and urban clusters are similar in proximity to SNAP retailers, that their proximity is much lower compared to those in to pantries in rural areas, while those in urban clusters and rural areas are similar in SNAP retailer density with a much lower density retailer density compared to those in urbanized area. And later on, we provided a pantry level regression. So we regress the pantry monthly visit on our 4 proximate measurement from a pantry to nearly SNAP retailers of different types. We have groceries store, convenience store, combination store, including independent drugstore, general mechanism, as well as the dollar store, and other stores, mostly composed of farmers market and specialty stores. So in column 2, that besides these 4 approximate measurement, we added the control variables for retailer density, as well as the local socioeconomic indicators. And in column 3, that we further add in the city and monthly fixed effect. So throughout all the specifications, we find significantly positive association between pantry monthly visit and the proximate to SNAP grocery store. But that's only one that we find is significantly associated with the pantry visit, not other SNAP outlet types. So a brief conclusions. So we documented the urban concentration of food pantries and SNAP outlets. There are more outlets in urban areas, but urban food pantry has fewer clients, fewer visits per site per month. And once we aggregated the pantry monthly visit at the census tract and census block level, we found that aggregated monthly pantry visits are similar for urban and rural areas. And through regression analysis, we find that 1 additional mile driving from our pantry to the nearest SNAP grocery store is on average associated with a 13% increase in pantry visit. So based on our study, I think there are 2 implications. The first, our result will help inform households of local food assistance resources. USDA or the pantries that we are collaborating with has their map showing the locations of their outlets, but not both of them. So our work, especially the maps, going to show where these outlets are in one map. So that will help a household to understand the availability of food assistance resource in their local communities. And secondly, that the results of our study will help food bank managers adjust food supply to food pantries in response to changes in SNAP retailer. And some of the other speakers have mentioned that SNAP retailers, they enter and exit the program for various reasons, and food and households have to go to these retailers to redeem their SNAP benefits. So once with that change, that food bank may observe these changes and further adjust like the amount of the food they can provide it to them to better cater their needs. That's all of my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Azisha. Another presenter within time limits. This is breaking with AAEA tradition, by the way. I hope nobody's membership is getting revoked. Next, we have Charlotte Ambrosek from the University of Minnesota, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So over to you, Charlotte.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone, for being here today. And thanks, Chris, for organizing. Today, I'm going to be talking about dollar stores, SNAP authorization, and food access. So this is, in a lot of ways, zooming in on some things that have already been spoken about today. This is work jointly with Lauren Teneritas, who's at Colorado State University. I'm at the University of Minnesota. Here's what we're going to be looking at today. So this is, I should say, this is early stage work, and we are very appreciative to funding from USDA ERS and from a USDA AFRI-NIFA grant. And our opinions are ours and do not represent those of the USDA, and they're not agency determination or policy. So we are looking at how dollar stores fit into the landscape of SNAP authorized retailers. So as people have mentioned, access to SNAP retailers has the potential to be very important for participating households' decisions about their consumption of food at home. Dollar stores have been on the rise. And so there has been some work that looks at sort of the role of dollar stores in the overall food at home environment. But we are looking particularly at the, as Isha might say, the food assistance environment, or the set of SNAP authorized stores. Sort of focusing on what we could potentially do about a causal policy analysis, we're going to be looking at the effect of a rule that was announced in 2016 and then implemented in 2018 that changed the requirements for firms that are SNAP authorized in terms of the variety, quantity, and like perishability of foods that they had available. So there were a few different subpoints there. And Laura, I would love to say that I had a crystal ball and I knew if there were any sort of stocking requirements that were going to change in this upcoming Farm Bill. But hopefully the evidence that we are able to show here will be sort of helpful for thinking about if there are changes, what the effects of those could potentially be. So thanks for the shout out on stocking requirements earlier. Our sort of priors in looking at these two questions are that dollar stores are going to fill potentially a geographic niche in SNAP authorization, that they might be potentially more important in rural areas, even more so than metro areas. And that when it comes to the 2016 rule, that dollar stores potentially have the resources from their chain status and maybe margins that come from selling non-food products to maintain their SNAP authorization and comply with those stocking requirements post the 2016 rule in ways that particularly small grocery stores might not be able to. So a preview of what we find, our prior on their importance in metro areas was maybe a little bit understated. So SNAP authorization of dollar stores is increasing in all metro and rural classification areas. I'll talk about how we define metro and rural if we have time. And then also that SNAP authorization of dollar stores is increasing after the final rule, and we find some suggestive evidence that that is not true for stores of other types. So our three main contributions, I think the first one is to look at this stocking rule change and how it affects the authorization of different types of retailers. And then, in the whole literature on administrative data versus survey data, we will be using the STARS historical retailer data. So that's the store tracking and redemption system. It's basically the set of all SNAP authorized stores. We're going to focus on 2014 to 2021. So we're not sort of missing anything from survey data or aggregated data here. So Bruce Meyer can not worry about what we're doing. And then the last thing is that we're focusing on rural participants. So I think USDA in particular right now has sort of an emphasis on making sure that rural communities aren't getting left behind when it comes to the food environment. And so we're hoping to contribute a little bit to that discussion by looking at heterogeneity across the rural urban continuum codes. So a little bit of background about dollar stores versus non-dollar stores. I'm not going to talk too much about the text on the left, and let's focus on these figures. The top panel is showing things that aren't from the big three dollar store chains. So the big $3 store chains we're defining as Dollar General, Dollar Tree, and Family Dollar. I think most people will be familiar with the names of those chains. They are large dollar store chains. And dollar stores in particular are not identified as such in STARS. They often fall under the combination store type, but they can fall under other store types as well. And so we'll just use regular expression matching to pull out stores that have this exact store name or within their name. So it could be, Dollar Tree number 378, but we'll identify that as a Dollar Tree. So that when I say it's a big $3 store is what I mean is that it matches that string in the store name. And you can see that those dollar stores are increasing pretty monotonically over time, whereas stores in the top panel, which are not dollar stores, are either stagnating or slightly declining over time. So this is indicating that dollar stores are growing. So is this important? The universe of STARS data of SNAP authorized stores is what we're looking at. Here you can see sort of on average the number of each type of store per month. Within our data, you can see the largest group are the convenience stores with nearly 120 convenience stores authorized each month in the STARS data. The smallest group that we look at besides these specialty stores are the large grocery stores. And the dollar stores at the top here, you can see, they're not a small group, but they're definitely not the biggest group either, but they are sort of growing. So I'm just going to show you a couple of preliminary findings about the potential, so this is sort of suggestive evidence about the final rule and its effects on dollar stores versus non-dollar stores. And then we'll try to look at this a little bit more for specific store types, breaking down the non-dollar stores. So the three columns here represent metro areas. So these are rural urban counties with a rural urban continuum code that is metro. The next column are the non-metro counties that are adjacent to a metro county. So you can think of these as counties sort of that circle a metro area. And then you have the non-metro, non-adjacent counties. So these are not adjacent to any metro county. These are probably the most rural areas. So the first row here, the negative significant effects of the final rule indicate that on average, the non-dollar stores counts per month are declining. So after 2018 relative to 2014 to 2017, there are fewer SNAP authorized stores per month in the non-dollar store county, in the non-dollar store categories. The dollar store indicator, that second row, that's just telling us that there are fewer dollar stores than there are non-dollar stores authorized in SNAP. So there's about 171,000 fewer dollar stores authorized in metro counties on average. That's not terribly surprising, right? It's not as big of a category. The row that we're particularly interested in looking at here is the post by dollar store row here. So this is on average after the final rule for dollar stores, what's happening to the counts of stores per county. And we see significant and pretty large increases in the number of dollar stores. So for sort of percent changes, you can compare this roughly on the order of magnitude to the constant here. So the percent changes are the largest in the most rural areas. So we're seeing that dollar stores are likely increasing in terms of their ability to remain authorized after the final rule is implemented. So then the question remains, what is happening to stores of other types that are not dollar stores? So we're going to break out combination stores, convenience stores, small grocery stores, and supermarkets. So convenience stores, the largest category that I highlighted earlier, are this green line. Small grocery stores are the blue line on the bottom. They are declining, and they are declining the fastest of any category that we look at that aren't dollar stores, and particularly, maybe after 2018 here, there might be a larger decline. However, the big $3 stores in orange are increasing. So this is our suggestive evidence indicating that maybe dollar stores are able to comply with these stocking requirements in ways that that small grocery stores in particular are not able to, and that may be particularly important in rural areas. I'm going to skip over our next steps for time, but just to say that we would like to do a little bit more with this to look at store specific characteristics like the number of retailers or the number of registers to see if that sort of is changing as well with the stocking requirement rule. So 2 key takeaways: dollar stores are important SNAP authorized retailers in all parts of the country. And we have some suggestive evidence that this 2016 stocking rule may have caused a decrease in the number of small grocery stores that are authorized, whereas dollar stores are able to continue to grow after the implementation of that rule. So this is extending our understanding of the rural food at home environment to SNAP authorized retailers in particular, and when we're examining the effect of these stocking requirements. So thanks very much, and hopefully we can have some discussion about this.
Outstanding. Thank you, Charlotte, very much. We have about 18 minutes before we start the next batch of presentations. So if people have questions or comments, if you'd like to make a comment, let me just ask to try to keep it relatively brief. This isn't an invitation to present your own work, but if you have questions for presenters or integrative comments, please raise your hand and let's invite some discussion with the presenters. Craig, you have your hand up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. So great presentations. So this mainly pertains to the final 3 papers. I mean, at least for me, one of the tensions in all this thing about having, when we think about retailers, is thinking about the size of the retailers and how many SNAP dollars are being spent there. A supermarket is not a supermarket, it's not a supermarket, or where SNAP dollars are being redeemed. I mean, so for example, 1 out of every 3 SNAP dollars are spent at Walmart. Roughly 90% of SNAP dollars are spent at superstores and large scale supermarkets. So it seems to me that some of these papers, when you're talking about the introduction of new retailers, that's really interesting. And also in Zhizhou, in your work, when you were talking about, some of these things about how near somebody is to a grocery store. But to some extent, the question, at least for me, is always like, in terms of your work, is how close are people to a place with reasonable food prices where people can go regularly do go shopping, where most SNAP users do go shopping. And then my question to Charlotte and Anne is to give some context as to why these new SNAP authorized retailers really will, in some sense, transform the retail food environment in ways that we should really care about in light of the huge scope for these other retailers.
Thanks, Craig. Charlotte or Anne or Zisha, any of you want to jump in to respond?
Yeah, I can speak to that point. I don't think, well, my prior is that it's really unlikely that a dollar store chain or dollar stores even collectively will anywhere nearly rival, Walmart or other sort of like big chains where people can go do their grocery shopping, especially at the beginning of the month when you want to maybe make a larger food purchase. I do think that, the access to retailers for smaller purchases later in the month and the ability to potentially smooth food consumption when you don't necessarily want to drive, like the nearest Walmart might be an hour away. And so if you need to be able to use any benefits that you might have remaining after that large purchase at the beginning of the month, what does people's access look like in that case? Like, what is the local scope? Can you go to your Dollar Tree that's in your not very large town near the gas station and go get something of reasonable quality? That's sort of my take on it.
Yeah, I think just to echo that the thoughts that Charlotte shared, one of the other things that we noted that I think is really important is the growth of club stores and the fact that you do have SNAP households that are willing to travel potentially further distances to go to a club store, presumably early in the month. And so the way that people are allocating their trips across the month and across their sort of overall spending, I think matters. The other thing is that as these authorized retailers see a benefit, right? They see an increase in sales. I think it provides evidence that there is a benefit, even if you're not going to be capturing most of the SNAP dollar, to be in the SNAP ecosystem, right?
And also for Craig's questions about, so for the current study, we only incorporate the distance and the approximate or density measurement. But I agree with you that the price is also going to be another factor that will affect the household usage of that. So our next step for our big project, we're going to trying to incorporate Nielsen data sets about the price that available at each of this retailer to see. So besides the distance, what's going to be price that household actually pay for their SNAP items, to see whether that's going to be another dimension would affect the usage of that. But it's still, it's going to probably next year AAEA, we're going to present more about that.
But Zisha, part of your result sort of echoes Craig's suspicion, right? That the density of or the distance to non-grocery stores has no effect on food bank use or food pantry use patterns. Only proximity to or density of grocery stores seems to have any association with food pantry use, which is exactly what Craig's comment would suggest one would expect to find. Other questions or comments? Yeah, Will, please.
Thanks, Chris. So, Charlotte, something you said that I'd like to hear a little bit more about, if you don't mind. You mentioned that because of the new stocking requirements, dollar stores might be better able to meet those requirements than other types of stores. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why dollar stores are kind of a better able to meet that requirement than other store types?
Yeah, so this is, well, I would say that is maybe more, I'll lower my hand because that's a question for later. So the mechanism that I had in mind there is that we have pretty well established that margins, profit margins for retailers on food items are fairly low, and whereas margins on non-food items are somewhat higher. So relative to a small grocery store, which is selling a higher share of food items, the sort of average profit margin across their product mix that they carry may not be able to maintain additional stocking requirements if they have to purchase additional refrigeration, or they're sort of not able to maintain the margins with any potential extra costs. Whereas a dollar store has a mix where they have some higher margin items, sort of more in line with what you see with like a convenience store or a combination store. And so that's sort of the thinking for the grocery stores in particular being affected. And does that sort of jive with your priors or answer your question?
It jives. Thanks, Charlotte.
Yep.
And Charlotte, had you a different question or comment that you wanted to make?
Oh, I had a question for Zisha about the mechanisms. I think that finding about proximity to grocery stores is really interesting. And it made me think of a paper that I saw a few years ago by Tim Richards about sort of modeling the spillover of foods from grocery stores to food pantries, sort of donations from grocery stores. I was wondering if you were thinking about the mechanism there as being like related to selection, whether things that are close to grocery stores might have a better selection and people get to hear about that. So yeah,
that's a good
thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, I would like to see that for current version of this study, we are trying to provide just association instead of causality. Although it's appealing to do that, but the data probably still preserves that somehow prohibits us to taking a step further. And go back to your question about the mechanisms. So for my study, we classify all the grocery store, regardless of the scale, into one category. It's definitely it includes a lot of things underneath that. So one possible explanation for the significant association between the distance to grocery store and the pantry visit is about the product that they offer. Because for the pantry that the food bank that we are working with, Food Bank of Southern Tier in New York State, they basically provided a basket of food, like including perishable produce, like vegetables, fruits, as well as some of the canned foods, which is pretty similar to what they obtain from a visit to a grocery store. And imagine that you definitely you can obtain these items from a visit to convenience store or other stores, but it's hard to obtain them all at once in a single visit. And as I mentioned earlier, that these households are pretty sensitive to traveling costs. So probably that's one possible explanation for the significant associations only for SNAP grocery stores. Does that answer your question?
Thanks, Charlotte and
Yeah,
Zisha.
that's great.
Laura.
Hey,
Or
thanks.
Tina.
Okay, great. Yeah, going back to Charlotte's paper, I was just wondering if I was struck by that decline in the small grocers and wondering if you are able to distinguish between a grocery that like just completely exits, that's just no longer in existence versus one that's kind of lost its SNAP authorization.
We're not able to see that in stars. That is one thing we could definitely look at with TD links if we get the linkage working. So Lauren maybe wants to jump in here, but yeah, that would be my answer, is that we're really hoping the matching has proved challenging so far. So maybe someone at USDA has done this and has thoughts. We would love to hear that. But if we can get the matching working, we would really love to be able to say something. But yeah, exit is a really interesting mechanism there.
Yeah, sorry to hear about the challenges with that. I was involved in a group that was thinking about doing the matching years ago, and we went a different direction. But yeah, sorry to hear that's not as.
I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but I'll just chime in too. Yeah, we spent the past, I don't know, like 3 months working on matching it, and we got pretty far, at least in terms of the algorithmically joining the two. Some of the stats that we're finding aren't really intuitive. The match rates are super low. So we're going to go back through it and kind of tease out some of that. But totally to your point, I mean, I have a question written down too. And it's just like, to what extent even are the decline in the counts driven by the store exits, and in areas where exits might be driven by entry of other retailers.
Right.
So some of those dynamics are things that we can do when we get the data together. I have another paper right now looking at store exits just using TD links. And so that's certainly doable when we get that data. Great question.
Thanks, Lauren. One thing we noticed in what Zisha was describing is, especially for like small grocery stores and convenience stores, there are a fair number of instances of a firm exiting the SNAP authorized retailer database, and then the same address entering under a different name. Basically, there's turnover, the store sold from one to another. So from a consumer's perspective, these are the same things. They probably don't care who owns it or what the name is. There's a store at the corner of 3rd and Elm. And so those who are thinking about using that database do take the time to check addresses for continuity and turnover. Andy Carlson, you have your hand up.
Yeah, years ago, there was a study, this is probably pre-dollar store, that looked at that basically found that the further away a small grocery store was from, or a convenience store was from a large grocery store, the more likely it was to stock things like produce and kind of the more of the core foods rather than just snacks. And I'm wondering if in the dollar store research, if you're also finding that, or if you're even able to tease that out.
I'm not aware of us having anything on varieties. I think scanner data would be the way to do that, I think. But that is an interesting avenue to go down. I am writing that down. Thank you very much, Andy. Yeah, think about it.
Great comment. Ann Byrne, please.
Yeah, not to deviate, but I had a question for Lauren Miller that I wanted to get in before we switch gears. And that was about the family and friends component that you're seeing in food apps, right? Of like people getting food from family and friends, and that being such a big component. Does that mean that you'll be investigating whether or not people are distributing food to family and friends as well? Or how do we kind of think about that piece of the puzzle?
That definitely is a challenge. I think during our field test it is hard that there is some ways to tease out, was this food bought for someone in your family, in your household? or was this bought for someone outside of your household? Because ideally we'd like to keep it in the scope of household, right? Because if they're, like, for example, if they make a big food pantry donation and they record that, that's not food that they're acquiring for their household. And something I think with family and friends is a lot of times I think it doesn't register necessarily with respondents as, like, I think the word acquisition is so technical, you know, and when you describe it as, like, you know, you purchase or get food, I think it's something that's really easy to fall off, right? Both friends and family and work, you know, that people don't think about. You know, they might go to, you know, the vending machine and get, you know, a soda, but they don't think of that because that's just a normal part of their day. It's much less so of an event. I do think it's going to be even more challenging with all of the virtual buying, because there are ways, and that is something that I think is going to need to be teased out more. And I think as we look at the field test data, as we start analyzing, which we're getting into right now, I think that's a great thing to look at, is how often did people, because we did have an indicator at the end of the day that said, did you buy any food for anyone outside of your household? And so I think there's definitely some work to look at there.
Thank you.
Excellent. If there are no further questions, I'm going to suggest a 2-minute bio break or stand and stretch if you haven't already before we resume with Will Davis. Then we'll have a stretch of 4 or 5 straight 10-minute talks and another break for Q&A and discussion. So Will, if you want to load your slides, we'll start at 10 minutes to the hour. Bill, you want to go ahead and load your slides up?
Sure.
Sorry, I had to crank up my standing desk.
Hey, you got to do it sometimes. All right, you able to see this?
Yes, we see it just fine. Thank you.
Great.
All right, so just as with the first round, I will, in private chat, I'll send you 5-minute and 2-minute warning speakers. So whenever you're ready, Will, please go.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So my name is Will Davis. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Ag Econ at Mississippi State University. Today, I'll be presenting work co-authored with Jordan Jones at the ERS, Elizabeth Canales at MSU, and David Buys at MSU on estimating the relationship between local broadband access and online groceries purchasing among SNAP and non-SNAP households, evidence from Mississippi. It's quite a long title, but it's a working title. So quick disclaimer that we've all know and love, these findings and conclusions in the presentation are those of the authors and should not be construed to represent any official USDA or US government determination or policy. So let's start out by talking a little bit about online grocery purchasing, or I'll call it OGP throughout the presentation. So during the pandemic, we saw a pretty massive increase in OGP utilization. In 2019, roughly 19% of US consumers had purchased groceries online, and that increased to 79% in 2020. And with this increase in OGP prevalence and use, we need research identifying the potential determinants of OGP. These can be individual household or area level characteristics. Examples include things like attitudes towards OGP, local food access, internet access, resource constraints, etc. It's a pretty large decision process that involves a lot of different potential factors. And so we need more research to understand why people are choosing to use OGP or not use OGP. Now, some of the determinants from the literature include a meta-analysis which suggests that price value is less important in determining usage, while attitudes towards and perceived usefulness of OGP is more important. Among low-income populations, limited OGP is predicted pre-pandemic due to low interest in perceived benefit, distrust, lack of control, concerns over quality, higher costs, and limited reach in low access areas. Additionally, we think that people living in certain areas might face greater potential barriers to OGP use than others. So, for example, fees and tips are expensive for low-income populations, access to reliable internet and digital literacy. You can kind of think about internet access as a super determinant of online grocery purchasing. And then online availability, we know, is concentrated in metro areas, and you have less access to internet and online capabilities in rural areas. So another thing that it relates to OGP that we've seen during the pandemic is the ability for SNAP households to use their benefits to purchase groceries online. So in 2014's Farm Bill, there was something called the SNAP Online Purchasing Pilot. And the SNAP Online Purchasing Pilot, or SOP, did just that. It allowed SNAP households to use their benefits to purchase groceries online from select retailers. This was a staggered pilot rollout across 8 states from 2019 to 2020, but unforeseen to the FNS, and I think they reacted quite well to this, the pandemic happened. And so they pretty rapidly expanded the program in response to other states. And Mississippi, which we'll be talking about today, was the 45th state to implement the SNAP Online Purchasing Pilot on August 26th of 2020. Now, with the growth of SOP, we've also seen a growth in the percentage of SNAP benefits used for online redemption, including 1.7% in 2020 versus 5.7% in early 2022. So, the goal of this project is to use a novel pilot survey that we collected of adults in Mississippi to identify potential determinants and factors that affect OGP during the COVID-19 pandemic. So keep in mind, this is pilot data, so we plan on expanding this some, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the goal is to distinguish potential differences between SNAP and non-SNAP households, as well as households on other characteristics. And we combine these data with county level data on broadband access and some other characteristics I'll talk about. Now, with this novel online purchasing survey for SNAP and non-SNAP households, we have a total sample of completed responses of about 568, and this was all collected in Q1 of 2022. This is a pretty long survey. It's quite burdensome, to be honest. We plan on streamlining it some in the future, but we collect data on socio-demographic characteristics, economic status, food purchasing behaviors and attitudes, self-reported internet access and use, health, government assistance program participation, adult food security, et cetera. So there's a lot of ground to cover here. But one of the things we do is we ask respondents about the period directly before and directly after the COVID-19 pandemic for some variables, which include online grocery purchasing. So for example, did you buy groceries online before the pandemic or after? And also household food security, so that we can potentially understand differences in those outcomes across the 2 periods. And when we were designing the sampling targets for the survey, we used Mississippi population characteristics of age, gender, and race and ethnicity. We oversample from the low-income population in the state because we want to include more SNAP households. But also data were collected online through Qualtrics, which is slightly problematic for reasons I'll talk about a little bit later. Now, what we do is we combine these novel survey data with county level data to estimate the role of potential area level determinants. So this includes broadband access from the FCC, so data on the percentage of a county or a smaller geographic area that has access to broadband. We have the Food Environment Index scores and limited access to healthy food percentages from the USDA. We include population size and urban rural percent from the US Census Bureau. And one of the things we do is we ask if respondents purchased groceries online using SNAP or PEBT benefits. So we don't just get to see any online purchasing, but among the subset of SNAP households and PEBT households, we get to see if they use those benefits online. And then additionally, for respondents that did not report using OGP, we asked them why. And we haven't really dug into this too terribly much because this is a very early stage analysis, but a little teaser is the number one reported reason for not using OGP is that people simply like purchasing groceries in store. So that's something we found that's pretty interesting. Now, some kind of basic summary statistics for our sample. 41% of the sample is 45 years of age or older. 41% make less than or equal to $30,000 a year. For the counties in our sample, 52% of the county population is rural on average. And for counties in our sample, 11% do not have broadband. So one of the reasons why we do this in Mississippi that makes it interesting is Mississippi is not only highly rural, but it has the lowest broadband connectivity of any state. So it kind of serves as you could think of a worst case scenario for using online grocery purchasing. 60% of the sample is white, roughly 44% are male. We have about 2.29 adults in our households on average, and then about 1.22 children in the households on average. You'll notice there's a lot of missing data for the household child number question. We think people were probably just not particularly comfortable reporting the number of children in their household. So we're trying to figure out a way to work around that. Now, asking if households participated in SNAP in the last 12 months, about 36% of the sample were on SNAP. And asking if they purchased groceries online in the last 12 months, so this would have been in 2021, 2022, about 40% of the sample purchased groceries online, and then not conditional on any grocery purchasing online. The average number of months that the household purchased groceries online was about 2.3. With asking if households purchase groceries online in the last 12 months using their SNAP benefits, and this is not conditional on having SNAP, about 13% of the sample reported using SNAP benefits to buy groceries online. Then we asked if the household had internet access at their home. About 90% of the sample did, unsurprisingly. And then for those people who had access to internet at home, about 64% reported that their internet quality was very good or excellent. Now, again, these are really preliminary results. And one thing I'd love is any feedback about ways to expand the analysis. And we have some ideas I'll talk about at the end. But what we do for this presentation is just a really basic linear probability model where the outcome is any online grocery purchasing reported in the last 12 months. So this is going to be conditional on a set of respondent, household, and county level observable variables. And unfortunately, because of a lot of missing observations, the final regression analysis sample size is about 294. So we're figuring out some ways to do kind of better model selection and variable selection to get the most bang for our buck out of our pilot. Now, instead of showing all of the regression table, we're just going to show the left side column, which is the positive and statistically significant coefficients, and the right column, which is the negative and statistically significant coefficients. So remember, the outcome here is any OGP in the last 12 months. So households with more children and living in the household were more likely to purchase groceries online. Unsurprisingly, the probability or likelihood of purchasing groceries online is increasing with income. So we find that households that have higher household incomes are more likely to purchase groceries online. As a kind of counterintuitive result, we're still digging into, when we look at county no broadband percentage, we find that counties with higher percentages of their population that do not have access to broadband are more likely to purchase groceries online for the individuals in our sample. A very highly statistically significant and economically significant effect we find is for people who report regularly using public transportation. So people that report public transportation use are more likely to purchase groceries online. And then for these internet type variables, these are all referenced to the omitted category of not having internet at your home. And unsurprisingly, regardless of the type of internet you have, having internet makes you more likely to use OGP than not having internet. That's something we would expect to see. And then finally, we find a positive and statistically significant effect of being in good to excellent physical health. And this is self-reported. Now, for the negative and statistically significant effects, unsurprisingly, we find that the likelihood of purchasing groceries online is decreasing with age. And then finally, we find that counties that have higher percentages of their population in rural areas are going to be less likely to purchase groceries online. So rural areas seem to have lower rates of OGP participation. So in summary, effect directions generally match our a priori assumptions. So OGP is increasing with income and self-reported internet access. It's lower for more rural counties and decreasing with age, but we still need to do more here. So we need to examine this positive effect of county no broadband percent. I think we're probably just picking up some area effects that aren't accounted for in our other area level control variables, but we need to do more there. And then surprisingly, aside from county rural percent and no broadband percent, we find very little variation that's explained by area level characteristics. And also we find no statistically significant association between OGP and self-reported PBT, SNAP, or WIC. We still want to do the analysis for those households individually to look at differences in determinants, but we don't find that they have a statistically significant effect for the full sample. And since I see Chris lurking, next steps, expand analysis, do that stuff I said. We want to combine the current data set with data on the local food retail environment from a survey that we have from one of our co-authors. And then we want to expand outside of the pilot. So expand to other states, other regions, and see how these may vary within the Southeast and outside the Southeast. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Will. I've never heard anyone other than one of my kids accuse me of lurking. But yes, fair enough. So on to Craig Gunderson, please.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. Thank you for organizing this conference. This is fantastic. And I wanted to thank everybody for being here today. This is taking up a lot of everybody's time. So it seems like people staying around for this. So I really appreciate it. So this is the paper that I'm going to be presenting today. And the main thing that we're trying to get at is the fact that SNAP participation is underreported in surveys and charitable food assistance is underreported in survey. So try to get around these two issues and implications of addressing those two issues. Okay. So is that looking at this is a well-known issue that SNAP participation is very much underreported in surveys, including the current population survey. That's the work that Jim Sullivan and Bruce Meyer have been talking about for a long time right now. And this gives you some sense of SNAP underreporting from 2010 up through 2021. What's somewhat more interesting, well, actually, it's not more interesting, that's not the right term, but less discussed, is about how the fact is that the number of CFA recipients is greatly underreported a lot. Is that for a long time, we don't have, like with SNAP, is you have the actual number of caseloads. For charitable food assistance, you really don't have any sort of number of people getting charitable food assistance currently. So what I do for Feeding America is I establish the number of people who are receiving charitable food assistance based upon data from a few different surveys and also some checks within Feeding America to see how much is being distributed. And so what you can see here is there's a really, really wide gap between the number of charitable food assistance recipients as established by Feeding America versus that reported in the current population survey. It's really, it's a difference of 35 million people. So in other words, just thinking about this is you have to believe the gap is huge, especially in comparison to SNAP caseloads. I actually, coming into this, I wasn't sure which one I would believe more, but I actually really do believe the Feed America number. Well, not in part because I constructed it, but also is if you look at pounds distributed by Feed America, is if you believe the CPS numbers, is it means that each person going to a food pantry on average gets 250 pounds a year of food. That just seems to me to be not correct with what we know from other things. However, if you use Feeding America's number, is you get between 65 and 70 pounds of a year per person received through food pantries, which at least to me makes a lot more sense. And I can talk a little bit more about this, why I really do think the Feeding America number is more accurate than the CPS number. Okay, now what we're interested in this particular paper, though, is the connection between food pantry usage and then and SNAP participation. What you see here is SNAP participation rates actually are pretty high amongst food pantry users. Is they're somewhat akin to higher than what you even see amongst those with incomes below 50% of the poverty line. Okay, so this gives you some information about SNAP participation as observed in CPS amongst food pantry usages. So I'm a little bit less concerned about underreporting of SNAP by food pantry usage in this context. The other thing, though, is what's really quite interesting, I find, is that the food pantry usage by SNAP participation is quite low. Is that you find that amongst SNAP participants, is you're getting participation rates of around 28% in 2021, higher than eligible SNAP non-participants, but still quite low. And this is the point that I'm going to come back to later. Just okay. So I have 10 minutes total, right? Building upon this. Okay, so I'll just keep talking. Is that the food insecurity rates is one of the things that we want to look at is the food insecurity rates is that the food insecurity rates, we're going to look at this for SNAP participants and for charitable food assistance participants after correcting for underreporting. Okay, what you see here though is it's actually pretty interesting. I don't think people have looked at this before, but if people have looked at this before, let me know, is that you have really high food insecurity rates amongst those who are getting SNAP and charitable food assistance, slightly less for those who are getting charitable food assistance, and quite a bit less for those who are getting SNAP only. Most of all the work to date actually has only talked a little bit about, has only talked about SNAP participants versus say non-participants and ascertaining the impact of SNAP on food insecurity. This gives you a sense is that it really does differ by the receipt of charitable food assistance, something worth considering. Okay, and then is that turning to the, so here's what we do in this paper. Is our goal in this paper is to look at what happens to SNAP participation, what happens to charitable food assistance participation once you control for underreporting in both contexts. Okay, shoot. And so what you see here is that what we'll do is what we do in some sense is say, okay, we'll say that the number of participants, we're going to assign CFA participation to a number of people within the current population such that the number equals what's done by Feeding America. Similarly for SNAP is that we will assign people to SNAP participation based upon what the actual caseloads are. Okay, and we use various assumptions about this. Is the first is that the distribution of relevant variables with respect to CFA is the same for reporters and non-reporters. So in other words, if 60% of the people have incomes below 130% of the poverty line, reporting charitable food assistance will also assume that the distribution of the non-reporters is also 60% as an example. We also say that all reports of participation of SNAP for non-reporters of charitable food assistance are treated as accurate and vice versa. Now, this is an assumption that, for example, Dean Jolly, Brent Kreider, John Pepper, and I used in some of our work to say, okay, if somebody says they get SNAP, it's an accurate report. And we say the same in this paper. However, is that it also is an issue, the fact that we know SNAP is underreported and charitable food assistance is underreported. So we are missing some people almost by definition with what we're doing, but we have no other way to think conceptually, at least I don't have any way, maybe some of you all do, about how you assign SNAP participation and charitable food assistance participation to those who say that they're not getting it under all this, okay? Is that for each of these is we assume that there's 1,500 draws, and if you use 1,500 draws from the population, you converge pretty quickly to the same result for each iteration of that. Okay, so the three things we're looking at is SNAP participation amongst charitable food assistance participants, and you can read the next two. Okay, so then this is what we get when we look at this. Okay, so this is the charitable SNAP participation rate amongst charitable food recipients. Okay, the actual amount, in other words, that's what's reported in the CPS is 48.1%. Okay, if you just took a random draw from the full population, is that the SNAP participation rate would fall dramatically down to less than 1 in 4 people getting SNAP. I think that's unreasonably low. However, is that what is perhaps interesting is the fact that you do have really low rates of participation in SNAP amongst CFA recipients once you begin randomly assigning people to being charitable food assistance recipients. I think this is an important, potentially important issue because if 48% of charitable food assistance recipients are participating in SNAP, it means outreach is less important, okay? However, if only, let's say, 24% of people getting SNAP, only 24% of people are charitable food assistance recipients participating in SNAP, that means that there's a lot more opportunity to increase SNAP participation in this population, okay? then turning to food insecurity rates amongst charitable food assistance recipients. So this is then saying, okay, same thing as on the previous slide, is if all of a sudden you just start assigning food insecurity rates as you build it up to the correct number of people who receiving charitable food assistance, is the actual number, and CPS is it's 55.7%. If you start to randomize and you bring it up to this other levels, you're getting much lower rates of food insecurity. Okay, so in another paper that I won't talk about the other paper, is the fact that the story about food insecurity amongst CFA recipients is much different once you begin to take more people into the when you include more people in the count and bring it up to more along the lines of what Feed America is saying. Okay, so I think that this is another important thing. I've one more slide. Is then this is the CFA participation rates among SNAP recipients. Recall the fact that there is not a lot more, the gap between CFA and CPS versus and Feed America is quite a bit larger than it is among SNAP participants. So but what you see here then is that if you bump everybody up to the correct amount of SNAP recipients, it doesn't change things that much. Okay, I'm done.
Great, thank you, Craig. Another model presenter, well done. Our next presentation, building somewhat on this, is Pat Waddle. Over to Pat, please.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's the paper we're working on. We see how changes in SNAP benefits, especially increases in SNAP benefits, affect food pantry visits. And me, along with Chris and John Hodnott and Gus Fiber at Cornell, we're working on this. So what do? We merge administrative data on SNAP benefits and food pantry use from 2018 to 2021 in a 6-county region served by Food Bank of the Southern Tier in upstate New York. And we study whether like an increase in SNAP benefits changes food pantry visits at a household level. And we exploit exogenous variation in the timing and magnitude of increase in SNAP benefits because we have SNAP benefits received and food pantry visit data on a monthly level. And we see how the variation in timing and magnitude of SNAP benefit change increase affects food pantry visits. So we use administrative data here. Hence, we minimize survey measurement error. And because we have the universal SNAP users in the 6-county region, that's served by more than 130 food pantries. Hence, we reduce sampling error. And luckily, in our study period, we had exogenous SNAP policy changes, the SNAP expansions that actually do not depend on household composition or income levels. It's like regardless of the household composition or income level, people like actually experience increase in SNAP benefits. And eventually we want to provide insight into the dynamic relationship between how people use public and private food assistance programs. So for the food pantry data, we use Fresh Track data from Fresh Track. That's a system used by Food Bank of the Southern Tier from Jan 2018 to April 2021. And we have 35,000 families with 2.5 million visits, and each visit is like their visit to a food pantry where we have their name, date of birth, gender, and date when they visited food pantry, which food pantry they visited. And for agencies, we have 130 agencies. They include brick and mortar food pantries and mobile food pantries, and like 2/3 of the agencies in this data set are mobile food pantries. And for the SNAP data set, we use New York State OTTA provided SNAP recipient and redemption data. And we have data for 97,312 individuals. And we have 2.6 million records of SNAP benefits disbursement, each record being people receiving SNAP benefits like each time. And the exogenous benefit changes that we exploit here in this study. So during the start of the pandemic, like March to June 2020, first, SNAP benefits was increased up to the maximum amount regardless of like income eligibility. Usually like 30% of household income is reduced from the benefit that household size is eligible to. But in this, everyone was like receiving the maximum benefit that their family size is eligible to. And in December and later in December that year and January 2021, SNAP benefits were increased by 15%, like for all participants, regardless of their household size or income. And also every year, SNAP under the cost of living adjustment, SNAP benefits are adjusted. They're like increased usually by a small amount, but they're still increased regardless of the household income and composition every October. And so this is the summary of the match administrative data that we use. So this is a very interesting figure, the Venn diagram on the right side. So in the study area, 77.2% of the population like never appear in the SNAP or food pantry data set. And the second bigger circle, the SNAP circle, like 16.1% of the people only appear in the SNAP data set at least once. So they have received SNAP for at least once during the study period. And for the food pantry use, 4% of the population appear in the food pantry data set at least once. So they appear to be visiting pantries at least once throughout the time period. And the match number, 14,332, they appear in both data set at least once. So they visit food pantries as well, and then they receive benefits from SNAP as well. That's like 2.7%. So among all the SNAP recipients, 14.7% of SNAP recipients also seem to be using food pantry at least once during the entire study period. And 40.8% of food pantry users appear to be receiving SNAP benefits throughout the time period. And this is primarily a rural area. So the rate of SNAP users compared to the national number is like quite high. It's 18.9% compared to 12.6. But the food pantry users number is like quite similar to the national number. Okay, and then this is the figures we get from the OTTA provided data set for SNAP benefits, redemption and distribution. The figure on the left-hand side, so the x-axis is the day of month, and the blue lines are the histograms for number of like benefits distribution transactions. So what we see here is like most SNAP benefits are distributed from 24 to 27 of each month. And the figure on the right-hand side, it shows when do people like usually spend, like redeem their SNAP benefits. And what we see here is people usually, most of the transactions occur between the 1st to the 10th of each month. So this gives us like a cycle of when do people receive their SNAP benefits and when most of the people redeem their SNAP benefits. And it appears that people receive their SNAP benefits at the end of the prior month and then redeem within the first 10 days. And the same thing when we look for the pantry visit patterns, it's quite interesting that people the most number of pantry visits were between the 15th and 20th of each month. That's right in between where people like, that's actually after when people redeem their SNAP benefits and right quite before where their SNAP like EBT cards get loaded. So this gives us like a monthly cycle of when people receive SNAP, spend their SNAP dollars, and then visit food pantries. And this figure is the client weighted change across the time period for food pantry visits. The gray shaded areas are the two policy changes in the pandemic, the exogenous policy changes where the SNAP benefits were expanded. And what we see here is the blue line, who are all food pantry users. They increase their benefits, they increase their food pantry visits by quite a lot compared to the red line, who are like SNAP users who also visit food pantries. And although we see slight increase in the SNAP users who visit food pantry, the difference is a lot. And in those blue line, when we like check the data set more carefully, it was the new and temporary entrance into the food pantry data set. So they just like came in, they just visited food pantry for once or twice during March 2020. And then they left. But for the SNAP users, it was people who were already receiving SNAP who did not receive SNAP for some time. They actually started receiving SNAP more during the start of the pandemic. But the difference is quite huge. And this is what we wanted to study. So for the household pantry visits, we use the first difference model where the dependent variable is change in food pantry visits. And the independent variables, the first, the change in SB being the change in per capita SNAP benefits from the previous month. And the indicator variable SE is where the household experienced SNAP expansion. And then we interact it with the change in SNAP benefits to get the exogenous SNAP benefit changes. And also we, for heterogeneity checks, we interact both the variables with urban, child, and female dummies. So the results, the main results here, especially for the exogenous SNAP benefits increase, it's like significant and it's negative. And it's intuitive because we expect people to reduce their pantry visits when their SNAP benefits increase. But the magnitudes are like quite low. So when we discuss this results, what it suggests is like increased SNAP benefits has significant negative effect on pantry visits, but the magnitude is like so small. Even the maximum benefit increase during our study period, that was $202 per month. The expected change in pantry visits for a household is 0. So we didn't observe people visiting food pantries less when their SNAP benefits increased. And yeah, basically SNAP expansion was insufficient to reduce food pantry demand. But to be careful here, this result is asymmetric, suggesting we expect different results when we measure effects of like SNAP benefits decrease like earlier this year. And for pantry level services, we again try to measure how total pantry services changes with respect to the exposure of its clients to food pantries, as well as the exogenous SNAP benefits expansion. And so again, for the pantry, because for individual level, the magnitudes were like quite low. The same thing when aggregated to a pantry level, we see insignificant results. And that suggests that increase in SNAP benefits had precisely 0 effect on food pantry visits. So there was like no reduction in the pressure on food pantries even after the SNAP benefits expanded. Thank you. Yeah, that's the end of my slide.
Thanks so much, Pat. Our next presentation is, I think Ryan Hastings is going to be presenting from Penn. Is that correct, Ryan? Or I don't know, maybe Jesse.
Yes,
Jesse Amber. Okay, over to you, Ryan.
Sweet. So hi, I'm Ryan Hastings, and today I'm presenting joint work with Lynn Fan, Jesse Hanbury, Ilya Rakowski, and Eric Sherp, titled Food Retailers and SNAP, Who Captures the Federal Food Dollar? The main question we're after is how retail prices respond to expansions of SNAP, because the effects and instance of the program depend on the supply side responses it induces. SNAP is a large component of retail demand, and 14% of dollars spent on food at US supermarkets are bought with SNAP benefits. There have also been large changes to the size of the program in recent years. This plot shows that the total benefits dispersed by the program more than doubled from 2008 to 2014, and then declined afterwards, at least until the pandemic. A pair of previous studies have looked at similar questions, showing that retailers do respond to SNAP-induced demand shocks. However, they find opposite side of pricing responses. We hypothesize that the diverging results are because the two studies looked at different types of SNAP changes. The variation in total benefits in recent years is both due to changes in the number of recipients or participation and changes in the amount of benefits per recipient or generosity. The paper by Lung and Cao study expansions along the intensive margin, benefits per recipient, and find that prices increase. Meanwhile, the paper by Haravel studies expansions along the extensive margin, program participation, and find that prices decrease. These are not necessarily conflicting, but the difference is noteworthy. We're hoping to do 3 things, which may be fairly ambitious. First, we'll step back and reassess both of these results by looking at the 2 sources of variation together. Then we'll write down a model that can reconcile these results and test its predictions. Finally, we'll estimate a few key parameters that allow us to quantify the program's welfare effects and conduct counterfactuals. We'll combine 4 data sets to do this. First, we'll use IRI scanner data, which reports weekly prices and sales of all food products at participating stores. We'll merge this with information from administrative data on store-level SNAP benefit redemptions from the USDA Food and Nutrition Service. The SNAP policy database records a panel of state SNAP policies, and food apps, which we've talked about already, tracks households' food purchases and consumption. This survey, as well as the IRI data on household trips and purchases, allows us to get a detailed picture of household shopping behaviors and food demand. In our main specifications, we'll regress store prices on either SNAP generosity or SNAP participation. The changes in benefits per recipient over time are largely driven by large policy changes like the 2008 Farm Bill and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which provide Lung and Cao with solid identification. However, the changes in participation are mostly continuous and driven, at least in part, by macro trends. They're highly correlated with changes in the poverty rate over time. This causes an identification concern when using simple OLS, since store prices likely also respond to macro trends. So one of our contributions is to reassess the price effects of the extensive margin expansions and confirm that the negative price effects aren't simply driven by macro trends. However, there are some policies that are driving some of the increases in SNAP participation over time. We use Stacy et al.'s Index of State SNAP Policies, which tracks expansions in eligibility, like changes in asset tests and the introduction of broad-based categorical eligibility, and other policies that make it easier to enroll in it and stay in the program, like online applications and longer recertification periods. We use this index as an instrument for SNAP participation. The next piece of our empirical strategy is including commuting zone time trends in our regressions. We can compare the responses of stores in the same commuting zone and the same macroeconomic environment, but who are exposed to different state policies. For the intensive margin, we borrow Lung and Hsiao's instrument. They measure simulated benefits, which isolates the policy variation by calculating the amount of benefits households would receive as the SNAP benefits formula changes over time if their characteristics like income stayed fixed at pre-recession levels. We're not going to present any regression tables today due to the limited time, but here's a quick preview of our results. We find that indeed, when we pull all stores together, prices tend to increase from expansions in generosity or benefits per recipient, and prices tend to decrease after expansions in participation. These results are in line with what Lung and Hsiao and Haravel found. Our third result, which is novel, is that we find that price decreases are driven by mass merchandisers, especially those in competitive retail environments in which there are other stores around. This leads us to suspect that the retail format matters a lot for the responses to SNAP policy changes. Here's a quick sketch of our current hypothesis of what might be going on. When generosity expands, a person's monthly SNAP budget will maybe increase by $20 or $30. This is a marginal change, and they may keep shopping at the same store they have been. The store can optimally respond by increasing prices to capture some of those SNAP dollars. In contrast, when eligibility expands, a person may see much larger increases, maybe up to $200. Since this is a big change, households may re-optimize and rethink their shopping behavior and even switch stores. To compete for these price elastic consumers, stores might lower their prices. The change in SNAP benefits may especially affect the trade-offs in deciding whether a household should travel to a mass merchandiser, which are geographically sparse and so often more distant, but offer lower prices. With a large payment of SNAP benefits, usually at the end of the month, recipients might now have liquidity where it becomes worth paying the fixed cost of traveling to go out to a large mass merchandiser, perhaps at the beginning of the next month, to take advantage of the low prices with a big shopping trip. Because of these big shopping trips, these merchandisers might try to attract these new recipients, especially by lowering prices, which is why we see them driving the price response. This has been a quick overview of our preliminary work, but going forward, we have a lot more to do. We'll check the robustness of these results and explore some various mechanisms, like the role of the local retail environment and whether the pricing responses happen at the chain level. We'll also use data on household purchases and trips to test our hypothesized explanation for the diverging price response. Then we'll try to estimate some key parameters like price and distance elasticities, which we can then use to conduct counterfactuals. We're hoping to simulate two counterfactual program expansions, increasing the number of recipients and increasing the benefits each recipient receives. We'll try to compare their welfare effects, taking into account the supply side responses and their spillovers on non-SNAP households. We look forward to sharing you sharing our results with you down the line. If you have any comments or suggestions or questions, feel free to contact us at the emails below. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much, Ryan. Well done. All right, our next speaker is Minhao Yan from Cornell. Minhao, do you want to go ahead and share your screen, please?
Yeah. Can you see it? Okay. Good. Hello, everyone. My name is Minhao Yan. I'm a fourth-year PhD student from Cornell at the Department of Applied Economics. And today I'm going to show one of our work on the food assistance service, and we study the location, which is the spatial variable and its impact on the food pantry. So first, I will talk about the background. So we all know that the food insecurity now is a very popular problem all over the world. And in the United States, the food insecure will impact like around 12% of our whole population. And we also find there is a big difference between the rural communities and the urban communities on the food pantries. And the third one is why we are doing this is because the continued expansion of the food banks, and we want to provide some politics suggestions for them. So here comes our three main objectives. So the first one is, what if in one county we want to build a new food pantry? Then where will be the optimal location? And the second object is, if we want to build a new food pantry, then what will be the optimal operation hours? And the third one, we want to find some barriers or some factors that may impact all the enrollment of the food pantries. So there are four main contributions of our study, and it also includes some of the results I will talk about later. So first, we define the food insecure areas. We basically we combine the areas which need the fulfillment and the some areas which has food insecure problems, and in the census tract area. And the second contribution is based on we build an optimization model in order to find the optimal locations and the optimal operation hours. The third one is our result. One of the very interesting results is that we find if we can delete inefficient food pantry in one county, it will save a lot of money. And by our study, we find that adding one or more new pantries will be the most efficient way to hold the whole food pantry system. And the fourth one is we found the optimal operation hour is 4 to 7 p.m. So here is our workflow, like how we do the total modeling and the data analysis. So I will talk about it here in more detail. So here is our raw data. Actually, we bought the raw data from a data company. It is like individual mobile data, which has the real time, the longitude, and the latitude. So you can see here, we have all the latitude and longitude and time, but sometimes we do not know, we have all the individuals, their track data. But the first thing is we want to know like how to define this person. It is the low income person or not. So as remember, we mentioned, we defined the food insecure area. So we define if this person, their nighttime is located in this food insecure area, then we can define them as our target population. And the next one is our optimization model. So we want to minimize the total cost, which contains two parts. The first one is the user cost. The user means the customer who are going to the food pantry. And the user cost also includes two parts. The first one is the transportation cost. And the second one is the waiting cost. So for the transportation cost, we have two different parameters. The first one is, what if this person has a car? Then there will be a different parameter. What if he does not have a car? He may walk there, or he may take some public transportation. So when we use another parameter, and for the waiting time, we use the parameter as the lowest wage and times the time how long it wait. And the second part is the pantry cost. It also contains two parts. The first one is the labor cost. We may hire some people to buy the food or to help all the customers. And the second part is some operation cost, which means the facility cost and all the food costs. So after applying our optimization model, here are our results. For example, we use the Broomy County, and the zero column, it means the current situation. So this is the total cost of the current situation in the Broomy County. What if we can delete like one inefficient food pantry? You can see the total cost in the system will be lower. So that means it will be more efficient. And the optimal strategy, which has the lowest total cost, is adding 2 new pantries. And here are you can see in the Broomy County, all the populations, they have 3 main clusters. So the blue spots, they are population, and the red spots, they are the optimal location of the food pantry. So here are if we add 1 new food pantry, will be the optimal location. And here are the 2 and 3 and 4. So we considered from -1 to 4 as the number of new food pantries. And also here are the maps, like how they appear on the Broomy County. And we can see that some of them are very close to the church, and some of them are very close to the household and to the river. So they are, and also it is close to the park. So all those optimal locations we checked, most of them, they can be applied to the real county. So yeah, this is basically what we have done for the spatial study of the food pantry. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Minhao. Very nice. We have time now for questions and general comments. We have about 35 minutes. So excellent job, each of the presenters. You all present really well. Questions or comments for any of them? Yeah, Orgel, please.
Hello. So not for you, Minhao, but I have question. I'm not a question really, a comment for Will and then to Chris. Will, I was that's okay, right? It's for all presenters.
Absolutely.
Bill, when you had that public transit result, and given what Minhao was just talking about cars, I was just wondering if it means that these people don't have cars, and with no car during the pandemic, they just chose not to use the public transit. As a result, directed their shopping to online.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we asked them a set of questions about access to transportation, including number of personal motor vehicles owned in the home, if they use public transportation, distance to nearest grocery store. Like I said, it's a pretty burdensome survey. So the results I showed, those were conditional on having access to a personal motor vehicle. So these are conditional on that, people that use public transportation. And we've talked about this a few times about what it might be, but my guess is that people who rely on public transportation more so than others are trying to find ways to avoid having to use it. So if you can use food that you purchase online for delivery to your home or pick up in store, it's just reducing transportation burden. And so I think that's what we're finding. We also we ask if they live if their community has public transportation too. So independent of your use, like, do you even have access to it at all? And we don't find anything for that, but we do find for users, there's a difference.
Okay, and it was increasing the online shopping, not decreasing it, right?
No, it was increasing it.
Okay.
So it was actually making them more likely to shop online.
Okay, so there's something you said made me think maybe it wasn't. Okay, for Chris, I was wondering if you think the difference in CPS numbers and the Food Feeding America number is maybe something, just more accounting issue. If CPS is kind of asking at this household level, if you're receiving, you report 10 million, say. But if different members of the household is going at different times to Feeding America, I don't think Feeding America counts the households. It counts individuals served, right? Do you think each household maybe, counted 3 times if 3 people, 2 adults, 1 older child is going to get these groceries from the Feeding America outlets? I don't know.
Yeah, so.
But I
Craig,
think there's undercounting. I don't want to challenge
Right.
it, but I think
Yeah, no, actually, after, I've always been convinced that it's really undercounted in there. But I think the undercounting, if it exists, is real, because the way Feed America does count it is they count it by the number of people in the household who come. So in other words, it should be the same metric. In other words, if 5 people if somebody comes to the food pantry and says, I have 5 people in the household, they count it as 5 people coming there. So it shouldn't make a difference whether you ask at the household level or just, and my numbers from CPS that I aggregated up were the number of people in those households. Yeah, so it's similar comparisons.
The other, Craig, if I understand Orla's question correctly, it's not just how many people are in the household represented by this individual who shows up. It's that in different visits, different people show up. Pantries commonly register them separately and therefore double count the same household. We did a lot of that deduplication in the data that Zisha and Pat described earlier.
Yeah.
No, you're exactly right. If I can ask a question later, I will, about just this issue, because I do a lot of work with Feed America on their service insights, where they get information from, I'm doing work with the Houston Food Bank and Atlanta Community Food Bank. And it's amazing, as you found when you were going into the data, how many different people from the households go to the food banks, to the food pantry, and then they record it in different places at different times, but they're all part of the same household, or they may be part of one household at one point, but not at another point. It really is complicated counting it. I should say the numbers for Feed America, the way we calculated them, was based upon not administrative data, but it was data for triangulating from different surveys. But I could talk more about that later if people want.
Please, Andy Carlson.
Thank you again. Excellent presentations. I am learning a lot today. My question is for Will again. One of the things I was noticing in your data is that there seems to be a lot of overlap. So you've got rural counties and you've got no broadband counties, and you've got, so I wonder if you've got multicollinearity, because it's simple linear regression, or if you're using that some way to tease it out. And if you are using it to tease it out, maybe some interaction terms might be more beneficial than just.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, we need to do some interaction effects. I was actually surprised by, and this might just be a Mississippi thing, but in Mississippi, I mean, of course, you have substantially higher rates of low broadband access in rural areas, but it wasn't as highly correlated as I initially expected it to be. When you look at rural versus urban in Mississippi, there's not a lot of urban. It's for the most part almost primarily, if not almost entirely, rural for the most part. I mean, you have a couple of metro areas, but mostly it's just differing degrees of rural status. But there's more there we need to do, because I think there's something like that, I think, driving that broadband, no broadband percent coefficient that we find in the regression, where, you would think a priori that if you have higher access to broadband, you're going to have higher access to online grocery purchasing and you'll have higher utilization. I think part of what we're finding too is that we're controlling for self-reported internet access. And so there could be something going on there. So it's like conditional on having internet access in your home. Do you living in a county with lower broadband activity, does that increase or decrease your likelihood? But again, these are like really preliminary results, but I absolutely agree, Andy. I think that there's more there we need to do.
The other suggestion I had is ERS has, and in addition to the census, they have an urban rural definition, which I'm not up on what the differences are between that and the census tract, but it is designed for looking at USDA's programs in terms of urban rural. So you might check it out and see if that makes any difference at all.
Sure, no, that's a great idea. I'll look into that. Thank you.
Thanks. Laura, thank you.
Great, thanks. One question, well, two questions. One very specific, I think, for Pat and Chris, maybe Zisha. I'm wondering if you've considered using the data that you've got to estimate the undercount in the CPS in that 6-county region. So that's one question. I mean, I think you could do that, and I'd be interested to see how that looks. I realize it's just 6 counties, but that might be interesting to see. And then I think another question, and maybe Craig might want to weigh on this too. I think, and I've done some work too, way a million years ago, looking at linking data from food pantries and SNAP in Kansas City. And I think we learned so much from that. I've always, I guess as a researcher, I think that's great. As a person who worries about low-income households, I wonder, do we want to drive food pantries in that direction where they're documenting better so that we, so that we can do this research? Or like, what does that mean for kind of their mission and their, I think they occupy this very specific niche where their assistance is just much more accessible than federal food assistance programs.
So was that posed to all of us or to someone in particular?
Well, so the first, maybe if Pat or Chris want to talk about kind of, whether they think it makes sense to try to estimate an undercount with the data that they have.
Yeah, we can. And you're thinking of something analogous to Bruce Meyer's recent JHR paper. We can probably do that here as you were suggesting. We're going to have a relatively small CPS sample for this because it's just 6 counties. Total population is less than 400,000 across those 6 counties.
Okay.
I suspect it's sort of underpowered. It's on the list of things we'd like to do, because it's probably an underpowered test. We haven't prioritized it yet.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Craig, do you want to take the second one?
Yeah, so I'm sympathetic, as a researcher, it's been great getting this data from Atlanta Community Food Bank and from Houston Food Bank and be able to do a lot of really neat analysis with it. What we're particularly concerned, what we're looking at in those studies is looking at food pantry visits over time to see how often people go to food pantries and stuff like that. It's quite interesting. But I will say is, I can't speak for the area in New York that Chris is talking about, but roughly 60% of pantries are not currently involved in recording when people come to their pantries. And even amongst those, you see a lot of variation in how well the data is recorded. In part, especially in somewhere like Houston, we have a relatively large undocumented population, and then having I can really see the advantages to this. Especially, there's reasons why you would want to have this. If all of a sudden people stop going to pantries, you may be like, well, I'm concerned about this person. What's happening? So in other words, you could think of some things that would be really useful to have this data for the individuals, not even for the researchers. So you can imagine, let's go check up on her. She hasn't been in it for a couple of weeks. What's going on? I can see some of those things, but I can also really see this issue of not wanting to be giving out some of this data. And again, as somebody who actually uses the data that is being collected, it's perhaps misguided for me to say that, but I'm sympathetic to that.
Yeah, Laura, I appreciate your raising that issue, because we do sort of bemoan how little we find in the administrative data they capture on clients of the food bank in the Southern Tier. By the same token, that is very much a feature, not a bug. So their first order of business is to maximize service, not to make things easy for researchers. So we work with them. Kelsey, please, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I guess one related question to the one just discussed about demographics of people going to food pantries for Pat or anybody else who sort of worked with this data, and then one specifically for Pat. So yeah, I was just wondering, to the extent that it's possible to observe whether maybe with names from that are collected from the food pantry assistance data. I've heard anecdotally that undocumented immigrants tend to turn to those sources, especially in states or places or times where they can't get access to food assistance. With known bugs, I guess that immigrants are maybe more likely to go to places where they are not asked for that type of information. But if there's just sort of any descriptive things that you could do with that to see how the SNAP versus food pantry attending populations look different. And And then my other question, I guess specifically for Pat, is if you mentioned like potential differences in like asymmetric effects of increasing SNAP benefits versus decreasing them. I'm curious if you have plans to look at, say, the reduction in SNAP benefits for New York, probably in March as the emergency allotments went away.
Yeah, great question. The answer to the second question is our data set just includes the data until the end of 2021. So we can't really see the change after the increase in SNAP, the decrease in SNAP, or the rollback in 2023. And regarding the first question, we actually don't have, we actually don't have any way to identify if they're like undocumented or no. We just have like name, last name, date of birth.
Yeah, I guess what I had in mind is maybe like Spanish sounding last names or something to infer.
Yeah, we have like names and last names, so we could like move forward with that, but that's the max we got.
Yeah, I want to be very cautious about that sort of activity of trying to guess based on ethnicity of last name. I don't think we could do anything that anyone would have much confidence in, I'm afraid. It's a great question. I just don't think our data would let us answer. Will, please.
Great. So I have a question. I've got a general question for Pat and then a question for all the food pantry people that went after me. Pat, I found that finding you had where people receive their benefits sort of like on the 25th day on average of the month and then spend it all pretty quickly, which we all know that's well documented in the literature. But then that increase in food pantry visits right before their benefits are recharged. Is that like a novel finding? I'm admittedly ignorant on most of the food pantry research, but I mean, that was pretty striking, was that you saw pretty much exactly what you'd expect. As you get closer to receiving your benefits, you're more likely to get, sources from food pantries and other locations. Is that a new finding, or is that something that's been around for a while?
Usually what we find in the literature is it is consistent with what we found. But I think the timing in the month was like new, because usually what we see is states send their SNAP benefits out in the first part of the month, and people redeem their benefits, and at the end of the month, like after 20th, they visit food pantries. That was mostly in the literature, but our data suggests that, the cycle is the same, it's just the day of the month that's different.
Okay. And then a second question, I guess this is for everybody. I've sort of recently become aware of how difficult it is to find where food pantries are. So if you want to look at it from like a national level or subnational level, it seems like there's some pretty major limitations in figuring out like where are the food pantries. And I know that there's been some data products come out recently, but is there movement from maybe the USDA or FNS or some other groups trying to create a database of food pantry locations, or kind of what's the best practice right now if you want to look into that?
So Feeding America does track that at different times in terms of where pantries are. I will say a couple things about that. The first thing is that a lot of food banks don't even know where they all are or they're still in existence. Now, the thing that you have to remember, as you know, Will, is that just similar with grocery stores, is roughly 10 to 15% of food pantries distribute 80 to 85% of the food. And for those, we have a pretty good sense of where the larger. So if you look at where food pantries are located, you're able to portray a pretty large amount of the food distributed. Now, in terms of count of them, that's where the issue becomes, as some will be overlooked.
Great. Now, I think that's an important distinction. Thanks, Greg.
Can I also just jump in and say one thing, that Feeding America represents, a vast majority of food pantries, but not all food pantries too. So I mean, there are food pantries that are not affiliated. I'm not sure what the actual percentage is now, but just wanted to mention that.
Very good. Craig, yeah, your head's up.
Okay, great. So this question is for Pat. So it's funny is that I may not have completely understood the stuff you presented on participation rates, but actually in terms of food pantry participation rates, you were getting similar rates to what we were finding in CPS, which I found really fascinating. And so I guess I would ask, let me just ask a couple questions because I want to figure out why maybe CPS may actually be more right than say Feeding America in terms of the participation rate. So two things. First, one of the things is I apologize for keep on mentioning the work that I do with Atlanta Community Food Bank and Houston Food Bank, but there's a lot of pantries that are not part of the system. And therefore, we don't even observe those visits or anything. So, and that's presented some challenges for us when we're looking at people visiting. That's my first question, is whether or not you actually observe the all the food pantries in there and how well they're keeping records, do you think? A second question about this is, as I mentioned before, is if we believe the CPS numbers, is you're getting roughly 220 pounds per person being distributed by food pantries, which to me always seemed high. But the more I've been working with food pantries on some of these things, it's not that unreasonable. So I'm just wondering, do you have any counts or do you have any information on the total amount of pounds you found distributed per person in your study? I'd be really interested in that. So those are my two questions.
Yeah, good questions. The quick answer to the second question is we don't. We don't have, we only have the days they visited, which pantry they visited. And we actually have type of service, but which is like not very much reliable. But we don't actually have the pounds or the quantity they received. And for the first question, we also don't have all the pantries in the universe of those 6 counties. It's only pantries who are using Fresh Track in the period. And it was rolling out gradually. So there were very few pantries in 2018, but started to include more pantries. But once they were in the system, they were pretty much recording all their visits. But we might have missed out on the pantries, and those were not using Fresh Track system.
Craig, unlike some areas of the US where there are major food pantries that are outside of a particular food banking system that covers that geography, that's not true within this 6-county service region. There are a few relatively small pantries that are not members of the food bank of the Southern Tier, but that's not going to have an appreciable effect.
Okay, so that's good. So what I was talking about were actually members of, say, the Houston Food Bank. They were members of it, getting food from them, but they weren't in the system. So, but you didn't find that in your work then?
We do have some pantries for which we have either no data or incomplete data. Those are very small pantries.
Okay, good. Yeah.
We have time for
I'm
more
sorry, what about Craig's question about the pounds per year?
We don't have those data. Sorry, Pat answered that first. We don't have those data.
And Andy, the data that I was talking about is just aggregate pounds from Feeding America, how many pounds they distributed, and then we divided that by the number of people being served.
Yeah, I'm just really curious what that number would be, because that would certainly help with your research, Craig, about, well, which number is right. Because it very well, I mean, I've never weighed the groceries that I bring in. I can pick up a bag and know, okay, this is more than 30 pounds because I can't lift it, or 35 pounds because I can't lift it. But you know, I have no idea what the weight of my food is.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine what 200 pounds looks like.
Over the course of a year, just to clarify, not on an individual visit. I should note, since we're talking about a whole bunch of people really interested in this topic, it's really a critical thing, because if people are getting a lot more food than we think, the impact of charitable food assistance on food insecurity is also correspondingly much larger for those getting food assistance. And so this is a non-trivial issue. I mean, just in my opinion.
Sorry, folks, we just lost power here.
Okay. So Chris, let me take over then, Chris. Chris had asked me earlier to take over if he could no longer be the moderator. Okay. So I'm taking over.
How do we know that, Craig? Do you have
I want to see evidence, Craig. This is a hostile takeover.
So, okay. So the next presentation then is by Argyle. And so we're glad that
Yeah.
your issues with respect to students pulling emergencies
Yes.
things are done. So you, like everybody else, have 10 minutes.
And I can hopefully answer some of the questions that are posed. Can you see my screen? Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so like I said, I hope to answer some of the questions raised about the food pantry, food banks, charitable organizations type questions. And even if it doesn't, it's not answered in the presentation, I think we may have the data to do so. All right, so I'm trying to see you and my presentation at the same time. If I am not successful, please let me know. All right, so this is a joint work with Pelin Packen, who's a management science professor here in South Carolina, and Krista Ruffini, who should be in the audience. The motivation is the interaction between informal and formal safety nets. And, many community organizations provide similar services as government programs, nutritional assistance, free food, food assistance being one. Others being housing support, childcare, education, etc. And the open questions that we have in this area are, when government resources expand, how are the charitable community organizations are going to be affected? That interaction, that crowd out is what we are trying to understand, is in all of the research you have done in some way or another. And these are the open questions. To what extent are formal and informal safety nets are substitutes, and does crowd out vary with local characteristics, and how? At least this is the question we're going to try to get here in this project. We're going to ask if the free food access in the school, free meal access increases in the schools, is this going to affect the food received through food banks? All right. The program that we are thinking is a part of, a lot of other community programs. And community food program we are thinking is also large, and food pantries serve about 12 million children per year. And like I said, school meals are largest form of nutritional assistance to school-age children. We have seen it earlier in Laura's presentation. More than 50% of students consume a school meal each day, and school-age children consume about half of their daily calories at school. And the other thing to consider going forward is, yes, these in principle can be substitutes, but the overlap between the clients is not perfect. There's imperfect eligibility overlap. 20% of food pantry clients with children have income that is at least 20% of the clients have income that is higher than the limit for government programs. So they are not eligible to receive some of the programs that provide free meals. All right, so the government assistance expansion in question here is the school-wide free meals through community eligibility provision. So this is, I know most of you know a lot about this, but this is a program that began as a pilot in 2011-2012 school year. All states became eligible in 2014-15, and participation over time increased in 2019. The last year in our data, it was around 25% of students. So 25% of all students across the country attended CEP schools. The food bank utilization side of the analysis we're going to do is going to use the data on data from Feeding America. We have the administrative data on amount of food received and distributed by the nation's largest, yet not the only, food bank network. And we also, this is totally Krista's work, she collected data on tax returns from food assistance from nonprofit organizations using their 990 forms, and did some additional analysis to get at that. We don't have all the food banks in Feeding America. What can we see if we were to look at another data source that may have more? All right, so let me give you the preview. I may not have the presentation skills of the earlier presenters. So we do see that expansion in free school meals reduce the food bank utilization. So there seems to be some crowd out. This is mostly driven by the areas where few students qualified earlier for free school meals based on income. So these are not the poorest areas where income is on the higher side of the things. And like I said, crowd out is imperfect. 20 to 50% reduction is what we see. There's some seasonality, which is consistent with smoothing of consumption into summer months. And we see greater crowd out in urban areas and low-cost food environments. So this is where we look at the heterogeneity by characteristics. So let me give you a very quick overview. Who are these students who may be getting the school-wide free meals? There are students who were already eligible. These are students who are SNAP recipients, SNAP non-recipients, who complete the program, complete the income forms, and these are low-income students. And then we have people who weren't previously receiving free lunch. Among the low-income, whoever weren't receiving SNAP or weren't completing the program, weren't receiving free lunch regardless of the income status. And we have now in these CEP program, which is universal free lunch, students who are from high-income families, non-SNAP recipients who are also not going to qualify for any assistance through income eligibility. All right, so this is how the program evolved over time. This is the pilot states, when only pilot states were in play, and this is after national rollout. Like I said, it's 25% in 2019, the share of students attending CEP schools. This is a graphical representation of the same story. As you can see, this is 2011-12, few states expanding the pilot states, and here's the national start year, and in 2017-18, it's pretty much all over the country. All right, community food resource data is coming from Feeding America data, largest food network. I think we looked at this number. It is over 70% of all food banks are part of Feeding America. Somebody asked this question. I feel like I have a very short-term memory these days. We have 200 Feeding America food banks in our data. They collect and distribute food to about 60,000 plus food pantries and community organizations. And we have the food bank data at the food bank level. We have what they distribute and what they collect, not the pantry and community organizations level. And you know, in Feeding America, like organizations, receipt is not conditional on income or other eligibility criteria. Okay, and this is a kind of a distribution of average quarterly food bank pounds per elementary students. So we don't really see any regional concentration, but more, you know, food is distributed per student in these darker blue areas. And as lighter it gets, it is less, and with some no data. All right, so repeating again, we have the CEP participation data from various resources. We have Common Core data, and that's the main core of our data. From 2011 to 2012 and 2017 to 2018, this is at the school level. And we then aggregated to the county level. This is the service area of our food banks, to calculate the percentage of students attending CEP schools. We had to do some mapping through school zones, etc. And we have the food bank utilization data is at the quarterly level. It's pounds of food distributed by Feeding America in each county between 2010 and 2018. This includes all within network transfers, purchases, and donations. And we, in our analysis, dropped the third quarter to focus on the school year, which are going to be two-way fixed effects estimations. All right, so I said we see a reduction. Here in this picture, you see at the very last component is the data from whole data, the estimates from whole data. This is about 8 percentage point reduction, which corresponds to about 0.2% reduction in the food bank utilization. And as you see, this quarter Q1 to 4 is referring to the income quarters. The largest reductions are from the, this is poverty quartiles. These are low poverty areas, and these are high poverty areas. We see the biggest reactions in the low poverty areas. And this is our main result. we looked at also some event studies, and you can see seems to be parallel trends prior to, there's no difference between low poverty and high poverty, pretty much prior to the adoption. These are quarters since CEP adoption. And we have a distinct difference between these two groups post adoption. We had to do some aggregation. We had to do some, since a continuous measure share of CEP students, since we don't know at the student level what the CEP participation is, our measure is share of CEP students, which we had to do some rules on how to treat it in an event study setting, which you can find the details in the paper. All right, so we looked at the food environment, like I said.
Start wrapping it up, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
It's your time's up.
Sounds good. So we have the high baseline middle coast areas and urban areas with the highest reductions. And we also calculated some the extent of the crowd out, and I'll give you the numbers very quickly. Given Krista's earlier work, some back of the envelope calculations, we are talking about total savings to Feeding America through Universal CEP between 227 to 642 million. These are coming from different estimates. And this is the offset to government expenditures, 7.7 to 21.8% of school meals.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Argel. I'm sorry. I just really have to keep on track. I'm very, very sorry. I'm very sorry. I'm tougher than Chris. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, Madhu, can you please, I guess you're the next, you're presenting your paper, correct? Okay.
Yes. Okay. Hello. I am Maida, and I am presenting my undergraduate honors thesis, and I'm an incoming master's student at Cornell University, and I'll be presenting my paper, Understanding Spatial Patterns of Households' Use of Food Pantries, which I worked on with Kelsey Schreiber, Chris Barrett, and John Hodena. So the research question that I explored was, what are the household level characteristics and pantry level factors that influence households to travel further to a pantry? So they could be going to a pantry that isn't closest to them, and they're traveling an additional distance that they might not necessarily have to be doing if they're opting to go to their closest pantry. So the motivation behind this research was that we used administrative data from the Food Bank of the Southern Tier, which serves over 130 pantries in 6 counties in upstate New York, or the Southern Tier of New York, which has over 200,000 pantry visits and 35,000 different households from 2017 to 2021. And we found that in more than half of the recorded visits, clients were not visiting the pantry that was closest to their home. So they were opting to go to a pantry that was further than a different pantry that they could have gone to. So to explore these questions, we employ a mixed methods approach, and the quantitative analysis is relying on that administrative data from FBST, or the Food Bank of the Southern Tier, to identify factors that are associated with households using a more distant or a further pantry. And then we also use a qualitative analysis where we're surveying pantry users to understand and kind of talk to them on why they might be attending a pantry that's further from their home than their closest option. So just an overview of the data that was used. We looked at the household characteristics. So that's just the age of the household head, the number of household members, the date of the first visit that they had gone to. So if this was their first visit. We also matched it with if they use SNAP, and to see if they are a SNAP recipient during that time. We had the coordinates of both the pantries and their recorded household address, and we determined which pantry was closest to their household. And we also had pantry characteristics. So that includes the location type. And so we have, this might be unique to FBST, but there's permanent locations and mobile locations, where mobile locations are operating out of these trucks, and they can operate kind of in a parking lot or different locations, and they kind of drive to a different place, and they can offer food there, and they offer fairly similar services. If the pantry is in a rural or urban environment, which is classified by the US Census, so we just have urban cities and by the census, and if it's urban or rural. We have if it's operating in a church, so like religious affiliation, and then whatever it's operating under. So that could be a fire station, a school, an apartment complex. And then if it's always a food pantry, so some buildings are just what we classified as a full-time pantry. So we defined each pantry as a proximate or non-proximate visit, and I'll talk you a little through how we did that. So we counted the amount of pantries that are closer to each household's residence than the one that they attended. And that's what's plotted here. And as you can see, and as you probably expect, that it's highly skewed, with most people attending a pantry that is fairly close to their home. A lot of people picking the one that there's no other pantries that are closer to them. But we kind of wanted to understand that tail end of the visits and why there's so many visits where people might be going to a pantry that is further than their closest option. So we break it into 25 and 75% of the data, where we have that tail end as those non-proximate visits. And with that, we use logistic regression to identify which variables can help predict those that are going to a non-proximate or proximate visit using the variables that I discussed earlier. So here is my huge regression table, and where I had a couple of different models looking at household level factors, pantry level factors, and if it's the first time that they had gone to that pantry. And I'll just talk you through kind of the key findings I have, just because we're a little short on time. Essentially, we found that all variables except for one was significant in predicting if a household attends the closest pantry. So we found that the only variable that wasn't significant was the gender of the household head. So the first time someone visited, the age of the household head, the number of adults, the number of children, the number of seniors, if they receive SNAP, if they live in an urban location, things about like pantry characteristics, like if it's located outside of a senior center, if it's located outside of an apartment. So those are your mobile food trucks that are trucks that can kind of go wherever they want. If it's located in a full-time pantry, so it's a pantry that is always a pantry. If it's in a church, if it's in a community building like a fire station or a school, if it's in an urban location, if the clients have the ability to choose their food, if it's marked as food for 3 days, and if it's a prepackaged like box of food, which was really popular during the pandemic, and continue to like go on. And as you know, this time period is 2017 to 2021. And a big thing that we found was that younger household heads were more likely to travel further, which, I mean, in this location, we have a lot of senior center pantries. So I think that's reflecting that. We also found that larger families were more likely to be visiting a non-proximate food pantry. So they're more likely to be traveling a further distance. And then we found that first-time pantry users were more likely to be visiting a proximate pantry. And sorry about that. We surveyed 4 pantries that had the most non-proximate visits to just gain firsthand experience. And so these are the 4 pantries that we surveyed. And we asked them a couple questions about how they got there, how they discovered it, how many times they had been there, if they'd gone to any other places, if they still go to these pantries, and if there's anything specific about the location that prompted them to come there rather than going to a different pantry. And I went in with an iPad and something called a Google My Maps, which is pretty much similar to Google Maps, where they can kind of interact with the map and find out which one is the closest pantry to them. And we found that pretty much almost all of them in this region were traveling by car to a pantry, with 68% of the pantry users driving their own car. And we found that over half of pantry users were not attending their closest pantry, which is similar to what we found in the administrative data. But then we found that over half of those are attending an additional pantry regularly. So they aren't just going to one pantry, they're going to multiple, maybe in like a 1 month period or a 2 month period, as a lot of food pantries have specific restrictions on how many times you can go a week or a month. And so we found varied reasons on why people would not be going to their closest pantry, with a lot of people just attending both, people not aware of their closest, they like the ambiance of a different pantry better, they had negative experiences with workers at their closest pantry, things like food quality, and as I said, the ability to go there more often. So finally, we just to conclude, the quantitative results show kind of mobility constraints of elders and larger families, leading them to visit pantries that are closer to home. And our qualitative results show that non-proximate pantry use arises because pantries are going to multiple pantries. Clients are going to multiple pantries, and also just highlights the value of a positive experience in food quality and the ambiance and interactions with staff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate great, excellent presentation. Okay, so the next speaker then, and our final speaker, will have plenty of time for conversation after this, is Krista Ruffini from Georgetown. So
all right,
Krista,
great.
please take it over.
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for staying until the end, and for Chris and Craig for putting this together. Let me just pull up my slides here. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit, and this is kind of a blast from the past versus mixed with a look to the future. And so in this project, we are examining what effect the pandemic era school meals program, pandemic EBT, had on food hardship and household well-being. And some of you might be thinking, it's great, like we want to know how this program was operating, but given that the public health emergency is now done, what does this mean going forward? And I would say that these findings still have very timely relevance as we're looking to get the summer EBT program off the ground in the next couple of years. Okay, so just to refresh all our memories about what pandemic EBT was, this was a new program that was implemented during the pandemic. It was authorized in March 2020, and it was reauthorized a couple of times throughout the public health emergency. And basically the way that this program operated was it provided grocery vouchers to families for the fungible value of the school meals that they lost due to school-related or due to pandemic-related school closures. So when school was out of session because of the pandemic, kids who otherwise would have gotten a free or reduced price lunch or breakfast got $6 that was loaded onto an EBT card. For SNAP recipients, much of the program's functioning was really seamless to SNAP. These SNAP recipients could use the card that they were using for SNAP. They just got an extra top up when the states made the pandemic EBT payments. For SNAP non-recipients, the program was a little bit more complicated and it varied a lot state to state. So some states had student residential information in their databases and they were able to locate kids pretty easily. Other states, kids needed to, or their families needed to proactively apply for this program. And so what this means is that for children who were in households that weren't already receiving SNAP, there was often pretty long delays in disbursement, and the timing really varied a lot. So for purposes of this presentation, we're going to be focusing on the SNAP recipients for whom we can identify the timing of payments more accurately. Importantly for our empirical approach, this was a state-led program, and this means laboratories of democracy. We have 51 very unique programs, 51 times 3 actually, because each state had to develop its own implementation plan, apply to USDA, and then actually disperse the benefits. And they needed to do this each school year and summer if they chose to do that. So I already mentioned this. This was a program that was really motivated by the school shutdowns in the early months of the pandemic, kids losing access to a really key source of nutritional assistance, and the grab-and-go meals having take up that was less than what we would see if school was being conducted in person. Okay, so there's a lot of variation in when the payments for PEBT went out, even though in many parts of the country, kids were out of school or out of the classroom for much of the school year. So in each year, we're looking at 2020, 2021, 2022. We see that there are some months in which essentially no pandemic EBT payments were made, even though many children throughout the nation were in virtual learning environments during this period. So we see late 2020 and the early 2021 and mid 2022. To give you a sense of the cross-state variation in both the timing of pandemic EBT and how much was going out, this is just data from the USDA that's showing in shades of purple the states that were making payments each month beginning in April 2020, and the darker shades of purple are going to correspond to states that were making more generous payments in terms of the number of children. So I'm going to click through the maps in rapid succession. The only takeaway that you should get from this is there's a lot of cross-state variation, both in when payments were going out and also the payment levels. So we have throughout 2020, a relative lack in late 2020, and a lot of variation into 2021. Okay, so to evaluate this program, we have issued FOIAs to all of the states. We currently have responses from 41 states, so we have pretty comprehensive data on the details of each state's programs. These include the dates in which the payments went out, how much the states dispersed on every single day, and the number of children or the number of families that received payments in each disbursement. We're going to map this day level information at the state level to measures of economic and food hardship from the Census Household Pulse Survey, which is a new data product that the Census Bureau developed during the pandemic. And it occurs on approximately a bi-weekly basis, and helpful for us, it asks a whole bunch of questions that ask about families' economic situations and also some measures that are related to food insecurity or food hardship. So we're going to be focusing on 3 populations: households with school-age children, and then we're going to further break down that population into low-income populations who report that they were receiving SNAP in 2019, as well as students that are in states in which school was out of session for a large part of the school year, because these are going to be the kids that are likely receiving the most generous payments. In progress, we're mapping the pandemic EBT program details with grocery purchases from the Nielsen Consumer Panel to see how grocery expenditures changed over time and also the healthfulness of the meals that families were purchasing. So our empirical strategy is pretty straightforward. It's a generalized differences and differences where we're looking at hardship for respondent I in state asset time T. The coefficient of interest for what I'm going to present today is just a binary indicator whether a state made any pandemic EBT disbursements in the previous 2 weeks. We're currently working into the analyses. A more granular measure of treatment that includes the payment amounts. We're going to control for our standard vector of household demographics, state and week fixed effects, and we have an error term. So the takeaway finding is we find that in both 2020 and in 2021, pandemic EBT substantially reduced very low food security among children. So in both calendar years, we see that if any payments were made in the previous 2 weeks, the rates of food insecurity among children fell by about 7 percentage points. This is about a 28 to 33% drop. These rates are slightly larger among areas that had high rates of school closures, and they're also relatively larger for children who were lower income. I haven't shown you the results for the total population because those are pretty close to zero. So this program appeared to have effects that are really concentrated among some of the most vulnerable families. We see similar patterns when we look at another measure of food hardship, which is just families reporting sometimes or often not having enough to eat. And we also see that the program reduced whether or not families are reporting that they can't afford food. We don't see any significant changes in mom's mental health, although point estimates suggest somewhat of an improvement, and we don't see any changes in the use of free food utilization. So going forward, we are building in more comprehensive measures of when the payments were being made and how much families were getting, and also mapping this to retail level data. So appreciate any comments or thoughts that folks have on this. And thanks so much.
Thanks, Krista. Okay, so now we turn, thank you all for presenting. Now we turn over to questions from the audience. Okay, Will?
So I've got a question for Orgel, and I guess Krista, since you're on the call too, and we're on the paper. You found these larger effects from CEP in the higher income areas on the spectrum of like CEP participation. I mean, in my own CEP work, I often see and think about the fact that in a lot of the lower income areas, most people are already on free and reduced price meals. So have you thought about doing that same analysis, but instead of looking at quartiles of income, looking at quartiles of like pre-CEP FRL participation?
Yeah. I mean,
So that's what the measure is.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah,
Well, then that was a good question.
yeah. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that, but yes.
Kelsey, why don't you pose your question, then I'll pose that.
Sure. I had a question for Medha. I think the mixed methods like qualitative interview component seems really interesting, and especially these findings about people saying things like that they went to further pantries for positive experiences. So I was just curious if you had any more insights or like comments people made and elaborated on things like the social visibility, like not wanting to run into neighbors, and more about these positive experiences, and if there was like any comparison between people's experiences in food pantries versus using SNAP on those dimensions.
Yeah, so for the last question you said, I didn't talk too much about in any of the surveys about SNAP. some people expressed kind of the SNAP reduction, which like in the beginning of this year. But to the kind of negative experiences, it was two different individuals who said that they felt kind of demeaned. I think some workers were asking them questions about you kind of have like a selection, you can choose certain things at the pantry. And some workers asked them questions about why they were making their selections. And they just didn't like getting asked those questions because they felt kind of misunderstood. And also just kind of limitations on what they can pick sometimes made them feel kind of unwelcome. So that's what those two people were talking about when they said that they didn't like pantry workers. And so those were just one experience. It was for both of those two people, it was the first time that they had gone to those pantries, and they never went again after that. But they continued going to different pantries. So they went to a different pantry, and then they became kind of regulars at a different pantry. So it didn't deter them from pantries all in all, but it deterred them from that specific pantry. I hope that answered your question.
So just a couple of things as Meta, I wanted to make a quick comment about that, is that there's been a push among some to have more choice at pantries. And in principle, I think having more choice is great. And that's why I love SNAP, because it gives people full choice. The problem is that as soon as you give people choice along this, is you do get some people working in those pantries who like to question your choices. Whereas if you just give people a box, then there's no sense of, they can't question what you're choosing. So I think that's really an important point about dignity. I wanted to make one more comment to you, is that there's Jody Tyson, who works for the 3 Squares Food Bank out in Las Vegas. And she has this incredible paper back like in 2012 or 2013, where she mapped out where people went for food pantries. And it's amazing how far people went. And Las Vegas, of course, is different than Southern New York, but it was like where people close to where they worked. They would like to go places where there's a lot more food. They like to go places with more meat. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different reasons why people go to different places. So what you're showing is consistent with that. So if you're interested, reach out to me, please, and I can put you in touch with Jody for some of her research.
In a different, I'm sorry, I just want, we found that where food pantries, where there is more volunteers, more part-time workers, this was about SNAP registration in food banks, they were more successful. And I think those part-timers or volunteers are, different, maybe more willing to be helpful or less judgmental. I don't know. So that was something we found.
Yeah. So, and here's my question for you, Orgel, is that, I mean, the Feed America, so here's what I always struggle when I think about some of these things, is that the food that's distributed depends upon the supply of food, and to a lesser extent, that actually it really doesn't matter at all the demand for food. I mean, all it is there's food coming in, and then you give that out, and when that food's done, you can't. In other words, there's no mechanism in the Feed America for food banks to increase it, because they usually can't borrow against future things. So I guess, you're finding this decline, and it seemed like a lot of groups decline. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, but we know over this time period, there was a huge increase in Feed America's, the amount of food that they were distributing over this time period.
Mm-hmm.
What was happening to all that food? But maybe I'm not completely understanding what you did, but I do want to see what happened to all that food.
I mean, this is, okay, so there is a choice system. So this, what they're distributing is going to be reflecting, choice system refers to when there is more need in one pantry, one food bank, say, and less in another one, there is some transfers between, and our data includes all those. And so we believe, at least given this, the distribution data reflects the demand side pretty well. Okay, and we also looked at I don't know if this is what you're asking, we also looked at the receipt of food that they received through donations, purchases, etc. And we didn't see any reduction in that.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I misunderstood some of your findings with respect to that. I thought you were showing declines in the usage of some of these. Okay. So surely people have other questions. Really? Okay.
Can I ask a
Charlotte
question
has
to Krista? Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Anne, and then I'll.
Sorry about that. No, so I was just wondering about the timing component, where you were saying like you have the pulse surveys, and then you have the receipt of PEBT. And are you able to manipulate that at all to see sort of time since receipt and measures of food hardship rather than just, yeah, I guess to look at that.
Yeah. So we've played around a bit with the window, like just to get in the weeds, like the way our variables created is like the share of the survey week in which a disbursement was made in the past 2 weeks. If that kind of makes sense. I was just having this conversation with my RA. Apparently it doesn't make sense, but that's what we do. And so like that's going to range from 0 to 1. We've played around with different windows, and it seems like most of the benefits are really concentrated in like the first 7 to 14 days. And then after that, the results get much more attenuated. So yeah, it's consistent with families spending the money in a pretty short time period.
Cool. Thank you. Sorry, Charlotte.
Oh no, that's great.
Charlotte is next, and then somebody else had their hand up.
I think it was Katie.
Okay, and then Katie. Okay. Go ahead, Charlotte.
My question was for Orgel, and it was just to clarify, you had a column, I think, in your results about the like cost of food, the like high meal cost locations, and you were finding larger decreases in food pantry use in places that had high meal costs beforehand. And I was just wondering if you could sort of like expand on the intuition there and what you're finding.
Krista may be able to answer this question better.
I mean, I think they're like a priori, it's kind of ambiguous, right? Because like both the school meals and the food banks are providing an in-kind service. And in areas where the price of food is high, like the fungible value or like the equivalent value of that good or service is more valuable. But on the other hand, like we might think that the school meal isn't enough to like fully cover households' food purchases. So I think going into it, like you could tell a story where the results would go either way, and that we find a larger reduction in use in the high cost areas is either consistent with more of these moderate income families using more of food bank services in areas where food costs are high. And in other cases, like if SNAP or if they're able to more easily afford those grocery purchases, like they might not need to turn to community resources, I think is kind of the working hypothesis behind that.
Yeah, I think my thinking is the baseline being higher, but I was hoping, Krista, can you tell us a little bit about how the costs is calculated, if it is relevant, you think? I mean, you did all the analysis in this one.
So it's just directly from Feeding America. Yeah.
So, okay. Katie, did you have a question? Are you the one with your hand up?
Yeah, mine
Okay.
was for Krista. I was wondering what you guys were planning to do with the Nielsen data paired with the PBT stuff.
Well, we welcome any thoughts. So I think as a starting point, we're looking at grocery expenditures, and preliminary results are showing like very small increases in spending after PBT disbursement, but we're also hoping to use like the item level information to see whether or not households are consuming more produce or other foods that we might think are healthy. I think going into this, we had hoped to do the full on HEI, and we don't think that is necessarily possible, but if someone wants to tell me otherwise, I will be very pleasantly surprised. But other thoughts on what would be interesting to look at are very much welcome.
Don't look at HEI. It doesn't make any sense when you're using expenditure data. So you got just the right thing. Don't let anybody else tell you differently.
Wait,
Good
Craig,
idea.
sorry. It makes a whole lot of sense, because who is going to buy something repeatedly? You've got a whole year's worth of data when you look at scanner data. Who's going to repeatedly buy something that they're not eating? sorry, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to look at HEI, and in fact, the developers of HEI say it does, if you can do that, but we haven't, because we haven't had access to Nielsen data for quite some time at USDA, we haven't developed a crosswalk for it. I think that there is, and it may even be Katie's, there is a mechanism to look at, look at expenditure groups, to divide it up by expenditure. And I also want to caution you about not focusing on just produce, because about half of the vegetables being purchased, about half of the expenditures are in the produce aisle, or no, half of the cup equivalents are in the produce aisle and the other half are someplace else. And that might especially be true for people who are purchasing, for longer periods of time.
Yeah. So I should clarify my comment about HEI. I have a problem with it when people are using 1 week's worth of data and then extrapolating up. Like, that's where I have a problem with it. Some people are using food apps for it, just was not the appropriate. But Andy's right. If you have a full year, that's a different story. So I stand in terms of what the data you have. Okay. I believe the next question is Will.
Sure. So kind of to Andy's point, I always think about buying that bag of spring mix that goes bad in my fridge, but I just keep buying it. I can't stop myself.
Okay.
But I have a question for Krista. So Krista, I wasn't aware of how much across state variation there were in PEBT programs. I always figured it was pretty standard across states. Can you describe some of the variation? Like, where are we looking? Are we looking at, I assume probably amounts of benefits, but I mean, is it restrictions and where you can spend your benefits, things like that? How does this look?
Yeah, so my understanding is you can spend the benefits pretty much anywhere that you would spend SNAP. So like there's variation there, but it's largely reflective of the SNAP program. A lot of the variation comes in like how many disbursement states we're making, and then like holding fixed the number of days that kids miss because of school. If you have fewer disbursements, kids are getting a larger amount each disbursement. There are some states like Alaska that like would be making pretty small payments like on a pretty much daily basis, probably to a different subset of households. And then there were other states that like over the full period only made like a dozen disbursements. So that's where most of the variation comes. States also differed a lot in how long it took them to get the program off the ground each year. So for example, in 2020, the first states put money out the door in April, and by August, about a good share of the states still hadn't made any type of payment.
Got it.
And it
Thank you.
became like even more crazy in 2021.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think just to jump in, that's okay, Craig, just a part of that was, it wasn't passed and then, it was sort of passed, expired, passed again, expired. And so it was a lot of kind of fits and starts, I think, that, ended up creating this very, a lot of exogenous timing differences.
Yeah. Okay. Before turning the question over to Christian, I want to ask a question of Krista. So I actually think that your study, so if you look at some of the previous work on the impact of National School Lunch Program on food insecurity, that was done, relatively, 10% for eligible comparison participants, eligible non-participants. If I'm understanding your things correctly, you're finding somewhat bigger impacts. To me, at least, that points to the fact that maybe we should phase out the National School Lunch Program and just start in by giving people these EBT benefits. If schools want to keep their school lunch program up and the kids can just use their SNAP benefits there to purchase what they want, or if kids want to take their own meals to school because their parents think for whatever reason the kids prefer that. It seems like you're presenting a pretty compelling case to get rid of the National School Lunch Program.
I mean, that's certainly one way to interpret the Vine news. I will say that I think it speaks to the potential importance of the summer EBT program, because right now, like every 3 months of the year, we don't have a public health emergency, but we're in a similar situation where kids are losing this really key source of nutritional access without any type of stopgap measure. So like providing some benefits in the summer has the potential to have really big benefits. And like, it's an open question whether or not we should get rid of the school meals program or not. whether we think there's economies of scale in school provision, given that the school meals program is also targeted to low-income households that might be time poor, and school, like making your meal, even if it takes 30 seconds, it's still 30 seconds. So lots of open questions.
I'm not arguing for getting rid of all these cafeterias. I'm just saying get rid of this particular mechanism. And if I want to take seriously your results, and I'm going to start saying, you know, given what Krista found, let's start thinking seriously about it.
No.
Well, Orgel, so
but Craig, though, are you arguing to get rid of it really? Are you arguing for an opt-out, allowing an opt-out? So you can say, I want my kid to get the free meal at school, or I want to opt out and just get the cash instead.
But I mean, the issue, another issue is that the measurement of food insufficiency in household pulse is about 8 times as high as it is in the CPS. And what it really measures is very low food insecurity. So there's that issue. My question to Krista has to do with the timing issue that you brought up. And maybe I just didn't pay close enough attention, but are you, it seems to the non-smoothing behavior of the household would be encouraged. And I'm wondering if any of your results suggest that. And what was the other thing? You had something about whether one of your outcomes was sometimes or often not enough to eat. I'm just wondering what the difference between that and the food insufficiency measure is. I mean, I think it's just one, you just take away one option and then you get sometimes or often not enough to eat.
Yeah, so the first question on the food insufficiency, it's like it's a 4-point Likert scale, and it's the 2 most extreme forms. So I think the ones that aren't in that measure are you always got enough to eat, or
sometimes.
On the consumption smoothing question, that's a really great point, and I think something that we're hoping to look into once we build in the per disbursement amount data, because I think more broadly this can speak a lot to like how households are construing their food budget, and whether or not there's time and consistent preferences going on, or just how quickly they're exhausting a relatively small benefit versus larger sums. So that's really great, and stay tuned for results on that.
I'm really interested in what you find. I also had a question about, I wasn't clear on the measure of disbursement and whether that was normalized by the number of children or the school age population or anything like that.
Yeah, so everything I presented today is just like the very simple version, where it's just like a payment went out the door in the 2 weeks leading up,
and so it's aggregate payments. Yeah. Okay. I'm really interested in what you find. Thanks.
Krista, can I ask a question? Were there any difference between how the benefits were distributed? Like, we received a card. I'm in a CP district. They sent us a $380 card for each of my kids for the semester, I think. Was there much difference in how I mean, you said amounts differed, but did they just send it to school students in their households?
Yeah, so that's where there's a lot of state variation that's not easy to track down, just in how they were getting the money to the kids that didn't have the SNAP card. So in some, like in your case, it sounds like they knew that you attended this school that had universal school meals. They knew your address, and so they sent you the card. In other states, you might have to go online or fill out a form and apply in order to get that card. So there's a lot of variation in that way, and it's a lot of like how the on the ground implementation was happening is less clear. The other source of variation, like you got $380 lump sum for a semester. In other states, you might have gotten, say, like 2 payments of $190 at different points throughout the semester.
Also, there's going to be variation over the school format, right?
And there were also states that distributed and they gave big lump sum payments and then started giving it out monthly. So they didn't kind of make the April payment, and so they waited until August, and then after August they went September, October, November, and so there was a lot of the expectations of the households would probably reasonably be very confused.
Yeah, I think our first iteration of this project, one state that will go unnamed, the most accurate data that we were able to find for the state was through like a Facebook messaging group, because the official information that the state sent out, like that date came and went with no payments going out. And it was like the parents on this Facebook group who had the greatest insights. But
so we have 5 more minutes. And so are there comments on previous presentations? Or I will ask one comment, one comment for you, Nate, that I wanted to raise is, I think you raise a really important point about why people don't go to food pantries and how they go to other food pantries. I think that there's a lot of discussion about, making for Feeding America, about the neighbor experience being better, which I think is really important. But oftentimes these survey questions are posed to people who are already self-selecting into going to a particular pantry because they like it. What we don't observe is those who don't go to a pantry because they had a bad experience, or who go to a different pantry. So I think that some of what you're talking about, I thought was really interesting. So, now that you're starting your graduate program, I'd love to see a lot more things about the neighbor experience and how people manage having a bad experience, what they switch to or don't switch to in those cases. So kudos to you for looking at that. Okay, Anne?
Yeah, I just wanted to flag something. I was having some bandwidth issues after the last conversation, but are people following foodbanknews.org? And it's a relatively new source to me, but Laura had brought up this topic of sources and where to look for policy information. And they do have this how many food banks are there, where they've done a search of like independent food banks and listed out the independent food banks. And so I don't know to what extent this is a great source, because it's one that's relatively new to me, but I wanted to see if there were folks in this group that were more familiar with foodbanknews.org and what their experiences with it were.
No,
Okay.
but I thank you. It is good to know.
Something.
So, okay, well, if there's no things, I'm going to just make a few, I'm not Chris Barrett, but if you mind, I'm going to make a few concluding remarks since he's not here, okay? Is that okay, just to kind of send people off? I wanted to begin by thanking everyone for staying this. It's great to see it, because we're all able to observe who stayed. I mean, the people stayed the whole time. So I really, really wanted to thank everybody for staying the whole time. This was, a lot of time to devote to this. That's the first thing. The second thing is I wanted to thank Chris Barrett for I know he's not here to hear this, but for putting this together. A lot of us have been arguing for years that we need more people who do work in low-income country food insecurity to do work in high-income country food insecurity, and vice versa for that matter. So kudos to Chris for doing that. And I know other people are also doing this. John Hodenot is another person who's working on all this, who's historically done more work in low-income countries. So I think it's great that he put this together. And the third and final thing is I think this charitable food assistance is something that oftentimes really goes under researched. I mean, depending upon how measured, I mean, based upon Krista's work, we're going to be phasing out the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. But is even despite all of that, is that those programs, depending upon how it's measured, charitable food assistance is a bigger part of the free meals in the United States than school lunch program. Of course, it's much bigger than WIC, but nobody really talks about WIC anymore. And it's bigger, and it's arguably better than the National School Lunch program, depending upon how measured. So I guess I would say is it's been a really under-researched area with respect to this. And so, of course, it's much, much smaller than the SNAP. I'm not even comparing it to SNAP, but is that I think it's great that more and more people are turning their attention to this topic. And so hopefully we'll get a lot of great organizations, information out of this. And the fourth thing, as Craig mentioned in his comment, is that, there's nothing formal at the AAEA with respect to all this, but I know a number of you will be at the AAEA meetings. And I look forward to continuing these conversations with respect to all of this. Really looking forward to seeing all the papers you're talking about coming out and all these different areas. And so, okay, see some of you in a couple of weeks. Otherwise, see everybody later. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.